Long ago, before kings raised golden palaces or empires laid roads across continents, there were only the winds and the wandering people who followed them. Across the open grasslands of Central Asia, beneath endless skies, tribes on horseback moved slowly southward, drawn by the promise of new lands. It was around the year 1000 before our era, a time when the age of bronze was fading and the first iron tools whispered of change. These were no armies, but families, herders and riders who lived with their animals, who read the earth and the stars, and who shared a language carried on soft winds, the tongue of the Aryans, which meant simply, the noble ones. Their journey was not swift. It flowed like a river over generations, a quiet tide of movement that would one day shape the destiny of a land we now call Iran. As they settled the vast and varied plateau, they found a land of extremes, snow-capped mountains, salt-stained deserts, and green valleys hidden like jewels in stone. To the north rose the Alborz Mountains, guarding the Caspian Sea like ancient sentinels. To the west stood the rugged Zagros Range, forming a stone wall between this new land and the mighty powers of Mesopotamia. Between them stretched a great plateau, dry, often harsh, yet hiding fertile pockets where seeds could take root and families could grow. Here, these early settlers learned to tame the land, not by force, but by understanding. Water was scarce, so they listened to the mountains and coaxed it from deep beneath the earth. They carved underground channels, gentle veins of life called qanats, that carried sweet water from mountain springs to thirsty soil. Even now, thousands of years later, some still flow. Time moved forward. By the 8th century before the Common Era, two peoples had come to shape the highlands, the Medes in the northwest, and in the south, the Pasargadae, the tribe from which the name Persia would one day grow. The Medes made their home in the lush pastures near the Caspian Sea, their lives steeped in horses and highland warfare. They built fortified towns with thick walls and sturdy gates. One city, Ecbatana, stood like a jewel in the mountains, a place of 7 concentric walls, each a different color, silver and gold shining at its heart. To the south, among the arid hills and sunlit plains of modern-day Fars, the Pasargadae built quieter lives. Their land was tougher, drier, and their genius lay in turning desert into farmland. Scattered villages clung to water sources, and their communities thrived on kinship, memory, and trust, weaving a strong fabric of local bonds that would one day become the backbone of an empire. These were not yet nations, not yet empires, but families of tribes, each led by chieftains who guided with wisdom and strength. Their flocks moved with the seasons, their hands worked the soil, and their hearts beat with the rhythms of the land. But on the far horizon, a shadow stirred. To the west lay Assyria, a fierce and fearsome kingdom. Its armies marched with iron in hand, its kings carved their triumphs in stone. The Assyrians were masters of war, and their gaze turned eastward. In their records, the names of the Medes and the Persua, early echoes of Persia, appear as lands to be conquered or taxed. The threat was real, and it drew the tribes together. The Medes, closest to danger, were the first to gather in unity. Stories tell of a man named Deiosis, a wise leader who brought order to the scattered clans and built a city from which he could rule. Whether legend or truth, his tale speaks of a time when loose alliances began to knit into something greater. As the 7th century unfolded, the winds shifted. Assyria weakened, its empire strained, and into that crack stepped a man named Cyaxares, a Median king with vision and fire in his heart. He reformed his armies, shaped them into disciplined forces of archers, spearmen and cavalry, and waited for the right moment. When Babylon rose in rebellion, the Medes joined them. Together, they marched on Nineveh, the proud Assyrian capital. And in the year 612 BCE, the unthinkable happened. The city fell, the age of Assyria ended in fire and ruin. And from its ashes, new powers rose. The Medes now no longer survivors, but contenders. And just beyond their growing shadow in the dry hills of the south, a young Persian lineage waited its turn. As the shadow of Assyria faded into memory, the Medes emerged to claim what had once belonged to empires now crumbled. They stretched their rule across the northern lands, from the fading cities of Mesopotamia to the rugged hills of eastern Anatolia. Their banners fluttered where once Assyrian kings had marched. In these lands, new order took root. The Persians, those southern kin of the Medes, remained allies, loyal though independent. They lived still among their sun-drenched hills and scattered valleys, bound by ties of kinship, but watching with growing ambition. Their leaders paid respect to the Median kings, yet their eyes remained on their own horizons. Though brief in years, the Median Empire left deep footprints. It showed the peoples of the plateau that they were not merely subjects of older powers, but creators of empire themselves. From the ashes of conquest, a new idea began to stir, that the lands of the East could stand equal to Babylon and Nineveh, not in ruins but in rule. The Medes adopted the tools of empire: scribes, roads, taxation, governors, all drawn from the well of Mesopotamian statecraft. Yet they kept their own colors, blending the old with the new. Cities blossomed, artists painted, carved and shaped stories in clay and stone. Their works carried the soul of their land, a harmony of mountain, steppe, and fire. And in the heart of this cultural flowering, in the quiet corners of faith, something extraordinary was unfolding. Somewhere, perhaps in the eastern hills, perhaps along a river bank at dawn, a man named Zarathustra began to speak. He was not a king, nor a warrior, but a seeker. The world he lived in was filled with many gods and endless rituals. Yet in visions, he saw something clearer, a light that burned beyond the veil of things. He spoke of one wise lord, Ahura Mazda, the source of all that is good, radiant, and true. Opposing him was a shadow, the spirit of destruction and lies, Angra Mainyu. Zarathustra taught that life was not a game of fate, but a path of choice. Each person held a spark of power, the ability to choose truth over falsehood, light over darkness. Through good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, one could shape the world, and their soul's place within it. These teachings, preserved in hymns called the Gathas, would echo across the centuries. They offered not just comfort, but clarity, that humans mattered in the great dance of the cosmos, that they were not puppets of unseen gods, but partners in the story of creation. Though not all embraced his message, and old beliefs endured, Zarathustra's flame caught hold, slow at first, then steady. His faith would spread, mingling with culture, politics, and kingship itself. Rulers began to see themselves not only as men of power, but as guardians of truth, defenders of order against the chaos beyond the walls. By the middle of the 7th century before our era, the land was ready. The Medes stood tall, their warriors hardened, their halls filled with song and law. The Persians had carved out their strength in the southern hills, quietly building cities, temples, and tradition. And beyond them, the old giants of Egypt, Babylon, and Lydia played their games of alliance and suspicion. No one could yet see it, but something ancient was stirring in the south, a fire that would change the world. Among the Pasargadae tribe, in a place of dust and olive trees, a child was born. His name was Cyrus, as the Greeks would one day call him. He would grow into something more than prince or warrior. He would become the architect of an idea, that many lands could be one, and many peoples could walk under one law, yet keep their own gods and tongues. But in 650 BCE, this dream was not yet dreamed. The Medes ruled from their fortresses. The Persians grew in silence. Across the known world, kings ruled as they always had, by fear, by tribute, by war. And yet, something was changing. Before we follow Cyrus and the birth of empire, we must turn briefly to another world, not of battle or decree, but of myth. For long before history wrote with stylus and parchment, memory sang through verse and tale. Around fires, in royal courts, and under starlit skies, stories passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. Tales of heroes and monsters, of noble kings and treacherous foes. These stories shaped the soul of a people. Centuries later, in a time of poets and scribes, these legends were gathered into a great tapestry known as the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Composed by the poet Ferdowsi, it wove together Iran's mythic past, preserving the echo of voices long silenced. Though written in the 10th century of our era, the Shahnameh reaches deep into the mists of time, to an age when man still walked among giants. It is more than story, it is a mirror of the Iranian spirit, resilient, noble, tragic, and radiant. Before empire, there was legend. And from legend, the seeds of destiny. Now, dear listener, rest easy. Let the names drift gently in your mind: Zarathustra, Kurash, Ahura Mazda. Like soft stars above a desert plain, the path ahead winds toward golden cities and wide roads, toward one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. But for now, breathe deep. The night is long, and history waits patiently. Before kings wore golden crowns or armies marched beneath banners of empire, the land remembered in a different way, through story. These were the days before time had names, before dates marked the passing of years. In the hush of twilight, around flickering fires, elders whispered the first tales of how the world was made, how the first humans learned to till the soil, to make fire, and to rule not by force, but by wisdom. The earliest of these ancient kings, it is said, was a man named Achaemenid, the first to don a crown, the first to teach his people the ways of civilization. His descendants brought great gifts to humanity. One discovered fire, another taught the art of forging iron. Step by step, the world was shaped not by divine thunder, but by gentle instruction, the gift of order, passed hand to hand. Then came the warriors of the Pishtadian and Chionian dynasties, whose kings did not only rule, they battled demons, guarded their lands from chaos, and kept the delicate flame of truth alive. Their enemies were both monstrous and familiar, not just beasts and sorcerers, but the ever-present shadow of disorder. Raiders from the wild, storms from the unknown. Through every tale, a single thread is woven: the struggle to hold light against the encroaching dark, to keep the house in order when the winds of ruin blow. But of all these tales, one name shines brightest. One figure stands above them all: Rostam the Lion-Hearted, the son of Zel and the noble Rutabak. Born into a world where strength and virtue were prized above all, Rostam grew quickly, towering in stature and courage. With his mighty steed Raksh, a horse as proud and fierce as its rider, he fought for kings, for justice, and for the soul of the realm. He was a guardian of the throne, a slayer of monsters, a judge of right and wrong. Yet even the greatest hero is not beyond the reach of sorrow. There is a story, a quiet wound in the middle of the Shahnameh, that speaks not of triumph, but of tragic misunderstanding. It is the story of Rostam and Sword. As a young man, Rostam traveled to a distant land. There he met a princess, Tamina, and in their brief time together, a child was conceived. Rostam left, unaware, leaving behind a bracelet for the unborn child, a small token of love and fate. Sohaba was raised in secret, growing into a warrior as bold and brilliant as his father. Yet he knew his father only through stories. When war broke out between their kingdoms, fate, that quiet hand that moves all things, brought them to the same battlefield, on opposite sides. Unknowing, they fought. For 3 days they battled, strength meeting strength, neither yielding. On the final day Rostam, seasoned by age and experience, struck the final blow. Sohaba fell. And then, too late, the truth was revealed. A bracelet, a name, a dawning horror. Rostam had slain his own son. Sohaba, wise even in death, spoke softly: "It is not your fault. This was written in the stars." Rostam wept. The ground itself seemed to mourn. Sohaba was buried with honor, and even the armies bowed their heads. This tale, passed down through generations, is no simple tragedy. It is a mirror, showing us how pride clouds judgment, how silence can destroy, and how even love, when unspoken, can become a wound. Yet the stories do not end there. Within the pages of the Shahnameh, kings rise and fall. Some rule with wisdom, just, generous, and humble, before the heavens. Others fall to arrogance, cruelty, and the poisoned whispers of evil. One king, Zahak, listened to the voice of darkness. From his shoulders sprouted serpents, cursed creatures who fed on the brains of the innocent. His reign of terror lasted 800 years, until a humble blacksmith Kaveh raised the banner of rebellion, and a prince named Faradin restored the light. These stories taught not just children, but kings. They were not just fables, they were blueprints. A true king, the legends say, must listen to counsel, protect the weak, seek justice, and honor the divine order. Power without virtue leads only to ruin. From these ancient tales came symbols that would endure through centuries. The crown, the ring, the royal mace, even the grand palaces of real emperors, carved into the cliffs at Persepolis, echo the architecture once described only in legend. The kings of the Shonama did not just fight, they feasted, they composed music, they recited poetry, and above all, they celebrated the turning of the year with Nowruz, the festival of spring, still cherished today. A moment of renewal, balance, and light. The Shahnameh painted the world in two realms: Iran, the land of truth and civilization, and Turan, the shadowed domain of chaos and barbarism. Though symbolic, these names would shape real maps and real wars. The myth became memory. The memory became identity. And so, from these whispered tales and starlit legends, a people drew strength. They remembered what it meant to stand with honor, to lead with wisdom, to rise, even after sorrow. As we return now to the waking world, let the names of these heroes drift through your dreams. Ross, Tom, Sohrab, Kaveh, Feridun, rest gently beneath their watchful gaze. The story will continue, and with it, the rise of Cyrus, and the dawn of the Achaemenid Empire. But for now, close your eyes. History will wait. As we return now from the high peaks of legend to the long roads of history, we must not forget the myths we leave behind. They never truly fade. Even as stone cities rose and kings marched beneath carved banners, the stories of heroes and demons still lived, told in golden halls and whispered in shepherds' fields. The Achaemenid kings, masters of vast dominions and cunning administration, saw themselves not just as rulers, but as inheritors of that ancient flame, protectors of truth. Of Asha, the sacred order first laid down by mythical kings, long before maps were drawn. And so, as messengers raced along imperial highways, as governors counted grain and soldiers guarded mountain passes, the tales of Rostam and Sohrab still echoed. They offered meaning to the scribe and soldier alike, binding a vast and diverse people with a shared vision of destiny. Into this world, as the 6th century before our era unfolded, a child was born, a boy whose name would one day be spoken across the known world in awe and reverence. He was called Kuresh, though the world would come to know him as Cyrus. He was born among the sunlit hills of Pars, in a region called Anshan, where the Persians had long kept to their traditions, proud, patient, and quietly ambitious. His lineage, like the best of tales, is wrapped in both record and rumor. The Greek storyteller Herodotus wove a tale of omens and royal dreams, that Cyrus was the grandson of a Median king, Astyages born to his daughter Mandane, and a Persian noble Cambyses. Fearing a prophecy that the child would one day topple him, the old king ordered the infant killed. But fate, as ever, had its own designs. A loyal servant spared the boy, placing him in the care of a humble shepherd. Whether myth or memory, the boy survived, and grew. Persian records, however, offer a quieter version. In them, Cyrus is no orphan prince, but the rightful heir of a noble line, a member of the Achaemenid house, whose roots ran deep into the soil of southern Iran. These sources speak of a young leader who inherited the rule of Anshan around 559 BCE, still subordinate to the Median overlords, but ruling his own people with wisdom and strength. Whichever story you choose to believe, one truth remains: from humble beginnings, a world-changing path began. At this time, the world was held in the grip of 4 great powers. To the north stood Media, ruled by King Astyages from his stronghold at Ecbatana, old, proud, and vigilant. To the west lay Lydia, a kingdom of shining wealth and stone temples, ruled by King Croesus, whose riches would echo through proverb and legend. Further still, beyond the rivers of Babylon, the great cities of Mesopotamia lay under the rule of King Nabonidus, heir to an ancient legacy stretching back to Sumer. And to the south, along the winding Nile, Egypt endured, old as the sun, ruled by pharaohs who claimed descent from gods. These kingdoms traded, schemed, and watched one another warily, balanced on a delicate web of power. None could have imagined that a 5th force, hidden among the hills of Persia, would soon eclipse them all. And yet, that quiet revolution began, not with conquest, but with rebellion. Cyrus, once a loyal vassal of the Median king, turned his gaze northward. Some say Astyages had grown cruel, Others claim his soldiers turned against him. Whatever the cause, the Persians rose. Around 550 BCE, two armies met, the Medes, experienced and confident, and the Persians, bold and determined. Against all odds, the younger Cyrus triumphed. The Median forces broke, and Ecbatana, the mountain capital, fell. And yet, in a moment that marked him as different from conquerors past, Cyrus did not burn the city. He did not punish its people or tear down its temples. Instead, he honored the Medes. He welcomed them not as enemies, but as brothers. He claimed not the spoils of war, but the legacy of rule. He called himself heir to their throne, and invited them into his growing realm. It was a gentle conquest, yet one that reshaped the map. The old Median Empire did not vanish. It transformed, becoming the roots from which the Persian tree would rise. And so the first threads of empire were spun, not through slaughter, but through wisdom. Not by erasing what came before, but by weaving it into something greater. Cyrus had stepped into history. The world would never be the same. Cyrus the Great, the name alone conjures images of gold and granite, of distant lands bound together by shared law and a quiet, unshakable order. But what made his empire endure was not just the reach of his armies, it was the grace with which he ruled. From the beginning, Cyrus understood something most conquerors never do, that true power does not lie in domination, but in harmony, in weaving many peoples into one fabric, not by force, but through respect. This principle became the soul of Achaemenid rule, a new vision of empire, where unity did not require uniformity. Yet even this wise vision could not shield the young realm from danger. The first to challenge it was King Croesus of Lydia, a man famed not only for his fabulous wealth, but also for his confidence in fate. Troubled by the rise of Persian strength, he turned to the Oracle of Delphi. The message was cryptic: if you go to war, a great empire shall fall. Convinced it referred to his enemies, Croesus gathered his forces. But it was his empire that would fall. As winter settled over the land, a time when most armies rested, Cyrus moved swiftly. He struck during the cold season, catching Croesus off guard. The Lydians retreated to Sardis, their glittering capital, believing they had until spring. But Cyrus followed without pause. On the plains outside the city, the Persians met the famed Lydian cavalry, unmatched in open battle. But Cyrus, ever the tactician, placed camels at the front of his army. The Lydian horses, startled by the strange scent, broke formation. The battle was lost before it truly began. Sardis fell, the kingdom was taken. And once again, Cyrus chose restraint over ruin. Some say Croesus was burned alive. Others tell that he was spared, becoming a trusted advisor at the Persian court. Whichever tale is true, the Lydian people were treated not as vanquished foes, but as new citizens of a greater whole. Their temples were spared, their nobles retained place and voice. This new province being formed, with Lydia and Media now part of his growing realm, Cyrus turned his gaze eastward. For years, he campaigned through the rugged lands we now know as Afghanistan, Central Asia, and parts of Pakistan. The records are sparse, but their echoes speak of conquests in Bactria and Parthia. Even to the edge of the Indus, the eastern gates of the empire were secured. But one jewel remained, the most ancient, the most glorious. Babylon, a city of towering ziggurats, and whispered prayers, of law, trade, and memory. But within its mighty walls, unrest simmered. Its king Nabonidus had turned from Marduk, the city's patron god, favoring the moon god Sin. Priests grumbled. The people whispered. The capital lay vulnerable. Cyrus advanced. He defeated Nabonidus's forces at Opis along the Tigris. And then, with remarkable cunning, he diverted the waters of the Euphrates, lowering the river enough for his troops to enter the city beneath its walls. But there was no battle, no blood. Cyrus had already won the hearts of the people. On the 29th of October, 539 BCE, Babylon fell, not with fire, but with welcome. In the years that followed, Cyrus would issue a proclamation on a clay cylinder, now famous across the world. In it, he described not conquest, but restoration. He returned sacred statues to their temples. He allowed exiled peoples to go home, among them the Jews who had long wept by the rivers of Babylon. To them, Cyrus was no foreign king, he was anointed a deliverer. This was not favoritism, it was policy. Cyrus understood that ruling an empire of many faiths and peoples meant allowing them to remain who they were. So long as provinces paid their tribute and kept peace, they were free to worship as they pleased, speak their own languages, and follow local laws. The Achaemenid Empire was divided into satrapies, each governed by a satrap or protector of the kingdom. These governors managed order, collected taxes, and upheld the king's authority. Yet beneath that royal umbrella, the everyday life of each region continued with astonishing freedom. Such was the genius of Cyrus's system, a strong center, surrounded by many local hearts. In his homeland, amid the hills of Pars, he built his capital at Pasargadae, not a fortress of fear, but a garden of harmony. The palaces there drew from many traditions: Mesopotamian strength, Median elegance, Elamite symmetry. Stone met flower, empire met earth. From this quiet place, the empire pulsed, from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Hindu Kush, from the valleys of Anatolia to the deserts of Arabia. And then, just as suddenly as he had risen, Cyrus left the stage of history. Some say he died in battle, far to the north, facing the fierce Sassanid. Their queen, Tamiris, is said to have slain him, and dipped his head into a skin of blood. Others believe he passed peacefully in his palace, the crown resting gently beside him. His tomb still stands in Pasargadae, a simple stone chamber atop a stepped platform, weathered by time, but untouched by pride. Even Alexander the Great, centuries later, would stand before it in silence. Cyrus left more than a kingdom, he left a vision, an empire not of forced sameness, but of shared dignity. A rule not of fear, but of trust. His successors would build upon this foundation, but none would match the quiet brilliance of the one who began it all. And so the great road stretched on, carved by dreamers, guarded by soldiers, and watched over by poets who remembered that once, long ago, a shepherd's son rose, not only to rule the world, but to change how it was ruled. Despite later clashes with his heirs, the Greeks regarded Cyrus as the ideal monarch. Xenophon's Cyropaedia paints him as a model ruler, wise, just, and virtuous. The Roman Empire borrowed many Achaemenid innovations in governance, and even today, modern Iran celebrates Cyrus as the father of the nation. Perhaps the most unexpected tribute comes from the United Nations, where a replica of Cyrus's famous clay cylinder rests in New York, often hailed as the world's first charter of human rights. The cylinder's modern significance may be debated, but it rightly honors Cyrus's groundbreaking vision, a ruler who championed governance based on respect for diverse peoples and religions, limited state power, and rule by consent rather than fear. These ideals still inspire. As Cyrus's son Cambyses prepared to ascend the throne, he inherited not only vast lands, but a revolutionary concept of empire, one destined to evolve under his reign and those of his successors. The Achaemenid Empire was born, and the ancient world would never be the same. When Cyrus passed around 530 BCE, Cambyses, already regent of Babylon during his father's eastern campaigns, assumed power over a domain stretching from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush. His challenge: prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. The transfer of power was smooth, testament to the solid system Cyrus had built. Cambyses's first challenge was internal, from his brother Berdia, called Smerdis by the Greeks, who governed the eastern provinces. Though details remain unclear, Cambyses swiftly neutralized this threat. With his rule secure, Cambyses set his sights on the last great independent kingdom in the Near East, in Egypt. For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt, land of pharaohs, had dominated the Nile Valley and extended its influence into Asia. It was now the final prize to complete Achaemenid control of the eastern Mediterranean. Cambyses began preparations for the defining campaign of his reign. Pharaoh Amasis, who ruled for over 4 decades, sensed the growing threat. He fortified Egypt's defenses and sought alliances with Greek states, especially Cyprus and Samos, aiming to counter the Achaemenid naval strength. But fate intervened. Amasis died in 526 BCE, leaving the throne to his son, Psamtik III, a young, untested ruler facing the greatest military threat of his time. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his invasion. His army marched along the Mediterranean coast, supported by a fleet of Phoenician, Ionian, Greek, and Cypriot ships. One critical ally was Phanes of Halicarnassus, a former mercenary commander in Egypt, who defected to the Persians, bringing vital intelligence on Egyptian defenses and terrain. A major obstacle stood between the invaders and Egypt proper, the Sinai Desert. Here, Cambyses demonstrated the same logistical brilliance that had marked his father's campaigns. According to Herodotus, Arab allies helped the army navigate the harsh desert by supplying water carried in animal skin containers on camels. Upon reaching the eastern branch of the Nile Delta, the invading forces met the Egyptian army near Pelusium. Despite fierce determination and home advantage, the Egyptians could not withstand the assault. After a brutal battle, their lines broke, and the survivors retreated toward Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. Following this victory, the Achaemenid army pressed deeper into the delta, eventually reaching Memphis itself. After a brief siege, the city fell. Psamtik III was captured. Initially, custom dictated respectful treatment of defeated monarchs, and he was honored. But when evidence surfaced of his involvement in rebellion, Cambyses ordered his execution. With the fall of Memphis in 525 BCE, Egypt became a satrapy, a province of the Achaemenid Empire. This victory was more than military conquest. It was the absorption of the world's oldest continuing civilization into the newest and largest empire. The land of the pharaohs, with its 3,000 years of recorded history, now answered to a distant throne. Yet Cambyses was not content with mere conquest. He adopted the full titles and regalia of an Egyptian pharaoh, presenting himself to his new subjects as the legitimate successor to their ancient line of kings. In Egyptian records, he appears as Mesotire, offspring of Ra, with a proper pharaonic titular temple. Inscriptions show him kneeling in the traditional Egyptian pose, offering prayers to the gods of the Nile. This cultural flexibility, the willingness to adapt to local traditions, rather than impose foreign customs, reflected the imperial philosophy his father had established. While maintaining absolute authority, Cambyses recognized the importance of respecting Egypt's ancient religious and cultural institutions. Not all his policies were so enlightened. Herodotus recounts stories of sacrilege and cruelty, killing the sacred Apis bull, desecrating royal tombs, mocking Egyptian customs. These accounts may be exaggerated or fabricated, reflecting later Egyptian resentment of Persian rule. But they shaped a negative image of Cambyses in classical sources. Modern historians take a more nuanced view. Archaeological evidence suggests Cambyses continued the tradition of reverence for the Apis bull, with records of a bull's burial during his reign. He also appears to have supported powerful temple establishments, understanding their central role in Egyptian society and governance. With Egypt secured, Cambyses' ambitions stretched further. He planned expeditions westward to Carthage and southward to Ethiopia. The campaign against Carthage was abandoned when the Phoenician fleet, the backbone of Achaemenid naval power, refused to attack their own colony. The sailors were loyal to the empire, but not against their kin. The southern expedition into Nubia, modern Sudan, achieved some success, extending Persian influence beyond the first cataract of the Nile. However, an attempted march across the desert to attack the oasis of Siwa ended in disaster. A massive sandstorm allegedly buried thousands of soldiers. While the historical accuracy of this event is debated, it marked a limit to imperial expansion in Africa. After nearly 3 years in Egypt, Cambyses was called back east to attend matters at the empire's core. It was during this journey that the most dramatic episode of his reign unfolded. News arrived that a man claiming to be Berdia, the king's brother, had seized the throne in his absence. Whether this claimant was the true Berdia, supposedly eliminated earlier by Cambyses, or an impostor named Gomata, as later official accounts assert, remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Whatever his true identity, this figure had one substantial support, promising a 3-year tax holiday across the empire. The sudden news of rebellion struck Cambyses deeply as he raced back toward the imperial heartland to reclaim his throne. But fate was cruel. The monarch died under mysterious circumstances. Herodotus says Cambyses accidentally stabbed himself with his own dagger while mounting his horse, the wound becoming fatal through infection. Native traditions place his death in Damascus. The timing could hardly have been worse, with no heir ready to succeed and questions surrounding Berdia's identity. The empire faced its first major succession crisis. Less than a decade after its founding, contemporary Greek writers painted Cambyses as a madman prone to cruel outbursts. Herodotus tells grim tales, the king shooting the son of a close advisor to prove his sobriety, burying 12 nobles alive, and executing subjects for minor offenses. These stories have cast a long shadow, marking Cambyses among history's infamous mad rulers. Yet these harsh portrayals must be weighed alongside his real achievements. Under Cambyses, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent before Darius the Great's reign. The conquest of Egypt, a civilization far older than Persia itself, stood as a monumental feat. His administrative policies in Egypt, continuing his father's respect for local culture, helped integrate this ancient land into the imperial system. Cambyses's death in 522 BCE brought a chaotic end to the first phase of Achaemenid expansion. The young dynasty, still untested in succession, now faced a crisis that threatened to unravel all it had built. The empire, forged so rapidly by father and son, stood at a fragile crossroads. Into this turmoil stepped a new figure, not a direct descendant of Cyrus, but destined to become the greatest of Achaemenid rulers. Darius, son of Astaspas, a noble of the royal clan, would soon seize the throne, eliminate the usurper, and cement his legitimacy through military skill and elaborate ideological claims. The institutions and policies he established would shape the empire for 2 centuries. As the summer of 522 BCE drew to a close, none could foresee the remarkable stability and prosperity that would emerge from this crisis. The succession turmoil following Cambyses's death is shrouded in conflicting reports. But one fact stands clear: a man claiming to be Berdia, Cambyses's brother, had seized power. Whether genuine or an impostor named Gomata remains debated among scholars. Amid this chaos, Darius emerged, a remarkable noble from a collateral branch of the royal family. As a young aristocrat, he served as a spearman in the royal guard, gaining first-hand experience with court politics and military affairs. According to his famous Behistun inscription, a massive multilingual relief carved into a cliff in western Iran, Darius led a conspiracy of 7 noble families against the usurper. In a daring palace raid at Susa, the conspirators surprised and killed the man claiming to be Berdia. With this immediate threat removed, Darius faced a delicate political situation. Though related to the royal line, he was not Cyrus's direct descendant. To strengthen his claim, Darius married Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, blending pragmatic politics with personal alliance. Despite these moves, rebellions erupted across the empire. From Babylon to Bactria, Armenia to Elam, as provincial leaders rejected the new king's authority. His own inscriptions boast 19 battles in a single year against 9 rival kings. Through military skill, strategic brilliance, and sometimes brutal repression, Darius suppressed these revolts. The scale of this feat cannot be overstated. The empire Cyrus had founded teetered on the edge of collapse. By sheer force of will and prowess, Darius preserved its unity, a realm spanning 3 continents and dozens of cultures. Once firmly seated on his throne, Darius revealed himself not only as a warrior but as an administrative genius. He transformed the loosely governed territories into a coherent state with standardized systems for governance, taxation, and communication. The empire was divided into roughly 20 provinces, or satrapies, each overseen by a satrap appointed directly by the crown. These provincial governors, typically drawn from aristocratic families, collected taxes, administered justice, maintained order, and raised troops when required. To prevent these powerful officials from developing independent power bases, the king appointed separate military commanders and imperial secretaries within each province, creating a system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, traveled throughout the empire, monitoring officials' conduct and reporting directly to the throne. These agents could arrive unannounced in any province with full authority to investigate complaints and correct abuses of power. Thanks to this oversight, even the most distant regions remained firmly under central control. A standardized tax system replaced the earlier, more ad hoc tribute arrangements. Each satrapy was assigned a fixed annual tribute based on its resources and productivity. Babylon, the wealthiest province, paid the equivalent of 25 tons of silver yearly, while less affluent regions like Bactria contributed smaller amounts. These substantial revenues funded the royal court, standing army, grand building projects, and the vast administrative apparatus. The great administrator introduced the first standardized imperial coinage. The gold daric and silver siglos offered reliable currency for both state transactions and private trade, minted with consistent weight and purity. These coins circulated widely, promoting economic integration across regions that had once relied on barter or local exchange systems. The famous Royal Road exemplified this ruler's administrative vision. Stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in southwestern Iran. This highway featured regularly spaced rest stations, bridges spanning major rivers, and mounted couriers who could relay messages across the entire empire in less than 2 weeks. Herodotus admired these couriers, writing that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents them from completing their appointed course with utmost speed. This emphasis on communication reflected a sophisticated grasp of imperial governance. Military might could conquer lands, but effective administration demanded rapid transmission of information and royal commands. The road and courier network allowed the central government to swiftly respond to rebellions, natural disasters, or bureaucratic issues in far-flung provinces. Legal reforms complemented these administrative advances. While provinces were encouraged to codify their local laws, certain universal principles applied empire-wide. Royal judges appointed by the crown supplemented local legal systems, especially for cases involving imperial interests or disputes between ethnic groups. Together, these reforms reveal a grand vision of imperial unity that transcended mere conquest, where Cyrus had laid the foundations through cultural respect and inclusion. His successor created the administrative framework necessary to turn that vision into practical governance. Together, they set a template for multinational empire that would influence all Eurasian imperial projects to follow. In 518 BCE, the master administrator commissioned a new ceremonial capital to reflect the empire's power and sophistication. At Persepolis, Parsa, an ancient Iranian construction began on a magnificent complex of palaces, reception halls, and administrative buildings atop a grand terrace overlooking the surrounding plain. Persepolis was not primarily an administrative center. Susa, Babylon, and Ecbatana continued to function as imperial capitals at different seasons, but a ritual space where the empire's power and ideology could be displayed through architecture and ceremony. Each spring, delegates from every province gathered for the New Year festival, bringing tribute that symbolized their submission to imperial authority. The most striking feature of Persepolis was the Apadana, a vast audience hall supported by 72 columns, each rising 70 feet high. Along the grand staircases leading to this hall, sculptors carved detailed reliefs depicting representatives of 23 nations bearing gifts to the king. These carvings, still visible today, provide a remarkable visual census of the empire's diversity. Bactrians with camels, Libyans carrying ostrich eggs, Ethiopians bringing ivory, Indians with gold vessels. These reliefs embody the imperial ideology at the heart of the builders' vision, an ordered world where diverse peoples willingly brought their finest goods to the great king, acknowledging his benevolent authority. Unlike Assyrian palace reliefs that glorified military conquest and the suffering of enemies, the Persepolis sculptures emphasize peaceful submission and harmonious incorporation of different nations into a single imperial system. The construction of Persepolis employed craftsmen from across the realm: Egyptian stonemasons, Lydian woodworkers, Babylonian brickmakers, Greek sculptors, making the palace itself a physical symbol of imperial integration. The architectural style blended elements from many traditions, creating something distinctively imperial rather than narrowly ethnic. This cosmopolitan approach extended beyond architecture to the daily functioning of the court and administration. Officials of diverse ethnic backgrounds held high positions. The imperial chancellery operated in Aramaic, a Semitic language serving as the administrative lingua franca, while provinces maintained records in their own languages. This pragmatic multilingualism balanced imperial control with local autonomy, supporting both governance reforms and monumental construction. The son of Darius did not neglect military affairs after securing internal stability. He turned his attention to the frontiers. Campaigns in the east extended imperial control into northwestern India, incorporating the fertile Indus Valley into the satrapy of Hindu Kush. Scythian tribes were subdued or pushed back, securing vulnerable frontiers in Bactria and Sogdiana. Most famously, the ambitious conqueror led an expedition into Europe, crossing the Bosphorus on a bridge of boats constructed by Ionian Greek engineers. After subduing Thrace, modern Bulgaria, imperial forces pushed north across the Danube, pursuing Scythian raiders who had long troubled the western borders. While this European campaign did not achieve all its aims, it established an imperial presence across the Aegean Sea, bringing the empire into direct contact and conflict with the Greek world. The encounter between these two civilizations, one a vast multinational empire, the other a collection of fiercely independent city-states, would have profound consequences for Mediterranean history. Conflict with the Greek city-states began during the later years of this expansionist reign, when Ionian Greek cities along the western coast of Anatolia rebelled against imperial rule. In 499 BCE, Athens and Eretria sent ships to support the uprising, though eventually suppressed. This revolt provoked the empire's first serious military intervention on mainland Greece in 490 BCE. An imperial expedition landed near Athens. To the surprise of both sides, the numerically superior imperial forces suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Marathon. This unexpected setback, while not immediately threatening the vast realm, marked the beginning of a confrontation between East and West that would continue under subsequent rulers. The defeated monarch had planned a new campaign to avenge Marathon, but domestic concerns, and then death, intervened. After 36 years of remarkable achievements in administration, construction, and military affairs, the son of his star spouse died in 486 BCE, leaving the throne to his son, Xerxes. The legacy of this transformative ruler extends far beyond his military campaigns or administrative innovations. He created a model of imperial governance sophisticated enough to manage the largest and most diverse political entity the world had yet seen. The systems he established proved so effective that they continued, with only minor modifications, for 2 centuries, surviving multiple successions, external challenges, and internal rebellions. When later Greek writers sought to understand the nature of imperial rule, they looked to his reign as the definitive example. When Alexander the Great conquered the empire 2 centuries later, he adopted many administrative practices established during this period. The Romans, in turn, borrowed from both the Alexandrian and original imperial models in constructing their own systems of provincial governance. More subtly, this monarch's reign represented the culmination of a revolutionary concept of universal empire, first envisioned by Cyrus the Great. Under his administration, the realm became not merely a collection of conquered territories, but an integrated system where diverse peoples could maintain their cultural and religious identities while participating in a common imperial project. This achievement becomes all the more remarkable when compared to the empires that preceded it. The Assyrians and Babylonians ruled through terror and forced population transfers. The son of his star spouse, like Cyrus before him, recognized that accommodation of diversity provided a more stable foundation for imperial rule than attempts at cultural homogenization. In the Behistun inscription, the ruler presents himself as the enemy of lies and the champion of truth. Beyond its immediate political context, this ideological framework reflects a sophisticated understanding that legitimate authority rests on a moral foundation. Physical power might conquer, but only just governance could create a stable realm. As his son Xerxes prepared to take the throne, the empire stood at its zenith, administratively coherent, economically prosperous, militarily powerful. The institutions established during this remarkable 36-year reign would provide the framework for imperial governance long after the memory of individual kings had faded, creating not just conquests, but systems. The third great Achaemenid monarch had ensured the durability of the imperial achievement. When the son of his spouse breathed his last in 486 BCE, his son Xerxes inherited an empire at the height of its power and organization. The new sovereign, whose name meant ruling over heroes, had been groomed for leadership from youth. As the eldest son born after his father became king, Xerxes had a stronger claim to legitimacy than his father had possessed through his mother, a Sassanid daughter of Cyrus the Great. He united the two branches of the Achaemenid dynasty. The early years of his reign focused on consolidating authority and addressing internal challenges. Egypt had rebelled late in his father's rule, and the young monarch's first major campaign reconquered the land of the Nile, imposing harsher rule than before. Babylon attempted revolt twice during this period, resulting in the destruction of some temples and the removal of the golden statue of Marduk, the chief deity, a significant departure from the more accommodating policies of previous rulers. With these internal matters settled, the royal gaze turned westward toward unfinished business with the Greeks. The unexpected defeat at Marathon during his father's reign remained a stain on imperial prestige. More practically, the fiercely independent Greek city-states posed a potential threat to imperial holdings in western Anatolia. A decisive demonstration of overwhelming power might finally incorporate these troublesome territories into the realm. Preparations for the Greek expedition were methodical and comprehensive, befitting the heir to the great administrator. For 4 years, resources flowed in from across the vast territories. Provisions were stockpiled, ships built, troops gathered from many nations. The scale of these preparations dwarfed anything the Mediterranean world had previously witnessed. Herodotus claims the assembled forces numbered over 2 million men, a clear exaggeration, but modern historians estimate an army of perhaps 200,000 troops, supported by a fleet of around 1,200 vessels. This massive host represented the multi-ethnic character of the empire itself. The imperial army was a remarkable mosaic of peoples and skills. The immortals marched from the heartland clad in their scale armor. Bactrian cavalry thundered in from the eastern frontiers. Ethiopian archers arrived from the south, while Phoenician sailors commanded the vast fleets. Dozens of other contingents followed, each bringing distinctive weapons, tactics, and appearances to transport this enormous expedition across the Hellespont. To cross from Asia into Europe, engineers from the region of Dardanelles built 2 enormous pontoon bridges. Hundreds of ships lashed together with flax and papyrus cables. When a fierce storm destroyed the first attempt, Herodotus tells us that the enraged monarch ordered the sea itself whipped as punishment. Likely a tale colored by Greek imagination to highlight Eastern arrogance, it nonetheless captures the unprecedented scale of imperial ambition. The rebuilt bridges allowed the vast army to cross over 7 days and nights. In the spring of 480 BCE, to avoid the dangerous waters around Mount Athos, where an earlier fleet had been lost, workers had spent 3 years digging a canal across the base of the peninsula. This engineering feat astounded contemporary observers. As the massive force advanced southward through Thrace and Macedon, most local powers submitted without resistance. The aliens, northernmost of the Greek peoples, accepted earth and water, the symbolic tokens of submission. Only a coalition led by Athens and Sparta prepared serious resistance, though they could muster only a fraction of the invading numbers. The first major clash came at the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae. Here, a Greek force under the Spartan king Leonidas attempted to block the southern advance for 3 days. The disciplined Greek hoplites fought in tight phalanx formation, inflicting heavy casualties on the lightly armed imperial troops. Only when a local guide revealed a mountain path allowing elite imperial forces to flank the Greeks did the battle turn. Realizing his position was compromised, Leonidas dismissed most contingents, but remained with his 300 Spartans, alongside some Thespians and Thebans, to cover the retreat. This final stand, though ending in total defeat, became one of history's most celebrated last defenses. A symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. With the land route open, the royal army marched into central Greece. capturing and burning Athens, whose population had evacuated to nearby islands. This might have marked complete victory, if not for an unexpected naval defeat that changed the campaign's course. The Greek allied fleet, though outnumbered, had withdrawn to the narrow straits between Athens and the island of Salamis. Here, on a late September day in 480 BCE, they lured the larger imperial fleet into confined waters, where their superior numbers became a disadvantage. Unable to maneuver properly and with communication chaotic, the imperial armada suffered devastating losses. The monarch himself watched from a golden throne on the shores of Attica, as the naval forces, years in the making, were shattered. This unexpected reversal forced a strategic reassessment. With supply lines vulnerable to Greek naval activity, the royal commander withdrew the bulk of his forces to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with a formidable army to continue operations. The next campaigning season, in 479 BCE, brought a decisive confrontation at Plataea. There, a united Greek army under Spartan leadership defeated Mardonius's forces after fierce fighting. Almost simultaneously, the reconstituted Greek fleet won another victory at Mycale, on the Anatolian coast, destroying beached imperial ships and defeating supporting land forces. These defeats marked the end of direct attempts to conquer mainland Greece, although the empire retained control over Anatolia, Thrace, and Macedonia. The empire would never again mount a major expedition against the Greek heartland. The failure of this massive campaign, despite overwhelming numbers, demonstrated the limits even the greatest military power faces against determined defenders advantaged by geography. Greek victories at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale were later mythologized as freedom triumphing over despotism, Western individualism overcoming Eastern collectivism. But this simplified story obscures complex realities. Many Greek states had sided with the invaders, and Athens and Sparta themselves soon pursued imperial ambitions. Still, these battles preserved the Greek political system's independence, allowing its unique culture and intellect to flourish on its own path. For the empire, these setbacks were not existential threats. The vast realm continued to function effectively. Central provinces remained untouched by distant conflict. The monarch, though disappointed by his European failure, returned to the imperial core to focus on other projects, particularly completing the magnificent construction program at Persepolis, begun by his father. The colossal buildings at Persepolis, including the massive hall of 100 columns, testified to continuing imperial prosperity despite Greek setbacks. Work also continued on canals, road maintenance, and other infrastructure sustaining an economy spanning 3 continents. Yet beneath this impressive facade, subtle signs of imperial challenges were emerging. The costly Greek campaign had drained the treasury, prompting increased taxation. Court life grew insular. The monarch appeared less often in public, while power concentrated in the hands of palace officials, especially harem women and eunuchs, controlling access to the increasingly remote sovereign. In 465 BCE, 2 decades after assuming the throne, Xerxes fell victim to palace conspiracy. The commander of the royal bodyguard Artabanus conspired with the eunuch chamberlain to assassinate the king in his bedchamber. The conspirators then framed Xerxes' eldest son for the murder, executing him before placing a younger son, Artaxerxes, on the throne, presumably expecting to control the young ruler as a puppet. But if that was Artabanus's plan, it failed. After months consolidating his position, Artaxerxes turned on the conspirators and had them executed, establishing his own independent authority. Thus began a new chapter in imperial history, one that would see growing challenges, both external and internal. As the sun set on the reign of Xerxes, a king whose rule ended in shadows of palace intrigue and whispered conspiracies, the legacy he left behind continued to glow softly, like the fading embers of a great fire. Towering stone palaces rose at Persepolis, monuments not just of power, but of a world united in its splendid diversity. The empire, vast and varied, breathed steadily under the careful systems his father had laid down, even as distant storms marked the limits of ambition. Though his great campaign against the Greeks had faltered, it brought a quiet change. Instead of swords clashing on distant shores, The empire learned to weave its influence with threads of diplomacy and gold, gently pulling on the tangled web of rivalries and alliances that stretched across the Aegean Sea. Sparta's rise against Athens was no mere happenstance. Subtle hands from afar had nudged the course of history without a single arrow loosed. The stories told of Xerxes often paint him as a figure of harshness and pride, but beneath these tales lies a tapestry woven with the complexity of ruling a realm that stretched from desert sands to snow-capped mountains. This was no simple kingdom, but a living mosaic of peoples and traditions, held together by a delicate balance of respect and order. When Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, stepped quietly into his father's place, the empire entered a new chapter, one where the pulse of everyday life echoed far beyond the throne rooms and battles. Imagine the gentle rhythm of life along the Nile, where farmers waited patiently for the floods to nourish their fields, or the high steppes where horsemen traced ancient paths beneath endless skies. Village elders gathered to settle disputes with the wisdom of generations, their voices calm against the backdrop of an empire that valued tradition as much as tribute. Across the land, cities hummed with vibrant energy. Babylon's towering walls, Memphis' timeless temples, and Sardis' bustling markets, all weaving together stories of faith, trade, and governance. Here, imperial officials moved quietly, scribes translating messages in Aramaic, a language like a soft current carrying the voice of the king through distant provinces. The great roads that stretched like arteries across the realm were not just pathways for soldiers, but lifelines for merchants, travelers, and ideas. Trade flourished as rare silks shimmered alongside delicate glass, and exotic ivory met golden vessels crafted far to the east. From the mountains of Bactria to the shores of the Mediterranean, goods and stories alike crossed borders, blending cultures like colors in a vast, living tapestry. Even the soldiers who once marched in the king's armies found new homes among the people, settling in garrisons where languages mixed and families grew in rich diversity. Their lives and those of the locals intertwined over time, creating new identities that bore the marks of many lands. At the heart of this grand empire stood the great cities, Susa, Babylon, Pasargadae, and Persepolis, each a jewel shining with the power and ceremony of the Persian kings. Here, amidst grand halls and endless columns, the rulers and their advisors shaped the fate of a world that stretched across continents and cultures, holding together a dream of unity and diversity. And as night falls softly over these ancient lands, the echoes of their stories continue to whisper on the wind, inviting us to rest beneath the vast sky of history. The reign of Xerxes ended as many great reigns do, not in battle, but in whispers. A conspiracy in the shadows, a blade in the night. Yet kings may fall, but empires endure. And Xerxes, though his name would be etched by Greek historians as a tyrant, left behind a realm that hummed with order, grandeur, and quiet efficiency. His greatest testament was not in battles fought, but in stones laid. Persepolis, that jewel of the empire, rose higher under his watch, its stairways carved with the figures of 100 nations, Medes and Babylonians, Egyptians and Lydians, all frozen in stone, bearing tribute to their king. This was no mere palace. It was a declaration, a testament to an empire that did not merely conquer, but absorbed. Yet for all its splendor, the true strength of Persia lay not in its monuments, but in its systems. The satrapies, the roads, the scribes who recorded everything in neat Aramaic script. These were the veins that kept the empire alive. Xerxes had inherited this machine from his father, Darius, and he left it turning smoothly, even as his own story ended in betrayal. The Greeks, of course, told a different tale. To them, Xerxes was the invader who failed, the proud king humbled at Salamis, but empires do not rise and fall on single battles. The truth was simpler. Persia had learned. After the costly wars in Greece, the great king's strategists turned to subtler tools. Why send armies when gold could do the work? Why fight Athenians when Spartans could be persuaded to fight them instead? The Peloponnesian War became Persia's masterpiece of diplomacy, a war fought with Athenian blood and Persian silver. Sparta marched, Athens fell, and the Aegean remained in Persia's orbit, all without another Persian spear needing to cross the sea. The Greeks wrote of Xerxes as a despot, but history is written by the victors. And the victors here were not the men who won battles, but the empire that won the peace. When Artaxerxes I took the throne, the empire did not shudder. It simply turned its gaze forward, adjusting, adapting, as it always had. The true wonder of Persia was not its kings, but its people. The countless lives that moved beneath the shadow of its power. From the Nile's floodplains to the steppes of Bactria, the empire was a tapestry of 100 peoples. Egyptian farmers still planted their crops by the river's rhythm. Mesopotamian laborers still dredged ancient canals. Highland shepherds in Anatolia still led their flocks between summer and winter pastures. Just as their ancestors had done centuries before the first Persian king rose to power. Persia did not crush these rhythms. It simply asked for taxes in return for peace. In the cities, Persia's presence was more visible. Babylon's markets bustled with glass from Phoenicia, ivory from Africa, tin from lands beyond the western mountains. Imperial officials moved among the crowds, collecting taxes, keeping records, ensuring the great machine ran smoothly. And then there were the garrisons. Towns of soldiers, veterans granted land for their service. Here, Persians married locals, Greeks traded with Medes, and cultures blended like spices in a merchant's stall. A soldier might be buried with a Babylonian amulet, a Greek cup, and a Persian dagger. His grave a silent testament to an empire that was not just vast, but woven together. And at the center of it all, the royal capitals, Susa, Babylon, Persepolis, where the great king held court, where satraps came to kneel, where the fate of millions was decided over wine and whispered counsel. This was the Persian Empire. Not just the wars, not just the kings, but the quiet, unbroken pulse of 1,000 lives, moving in harmony beneath the banner of the Shahanshah. And as the stars turned overhead, the empire endured. In the heart of the empire, an idea took form in stone and spirit. Persepolis rose not merely as a city, but as a grand statement, a place built to embody the vision of the Achaemenid kings. Its soaring staircases and vast halls, supported by countless towering columns, told the silent story of a world united beneath one rule. Delicate carvings graced the walls, showing travelers and tribute bearers arriving from every distant corner. A quiet reminder that many peoples, many cultures, all found their place under a single sky. At the very top of this world stood the great king, almost like a figure touched by the divine. Around him, a circle of powerful families from the empire's heartland formed the core of his court. Descendants of the legendary 7 families who had helped shape the kingdom's rise. These nobles held the highest roles, their authority stretching through generations. Beyond them, an expanding aristocracy took root, drawn mainly from the empire's central provinces, but also welcoming respected leaders from distant lands. By weaving local elites into the fabric of power, the empire grew stronger, its many threads bound into a stable whole. Beneath these great families lived the learned and skilled scribes who recorded the flow of daily life, engineers who dreamed of grand canals and roads, physicians who healed, and architects who shaped cities. Their talents crossed ethnic lines, prized and rewarded by the imperial administration. From Babylonian stargazers to Egyptian doctors, from Greek builders to Aramaic scribes, all found a place where expertise mattered more than origin. At the foundation of this vast society were the everyday people, farmers tending the earth, artisans crafting their goods, laborers sustaining the bustling cities. Their lives varied widely depending on where they lived. In Egypt and Babylonia, age-old social systems still held sway, with intricate layers between free citizens and those bound in servitude. In the imperial heartland, a clear structure separated aristocrats, free commoners, and a dependent working class. Slavery existed, but it was different from the harshness that would mark later centuries, often the result of debts, punishment, or captivity, with those enslaved working in homes, mines, or fields. The laws and customs governing these roles changed as you moved from region to region, reflecting the empire's respect for local traditions. Women, too, lived varied lives across the realm. In the heartland, noble women held considerable rights, owning land, managing businesses, and sometimes even stepping into administrative roles. Tablets from Persepolis reveal that women workers were given the same food rations as men for equal labor. an early glimpse of fairness in a world so long ruled by men. Queens and princesses wielded quiet power at court, overseeing vast households and influencing the fate of kings. Observers from Greece, where women's freedoms were more limited, often marveled at the Eastern world's openness. Religion within the empire was a tapestry of faiths. At its core was Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrian belief, guiding the king's authority. Yet the empire was a sanctuary for many traditions. Temples dedicated to Marduk in Babylon, Amen in Egypt, or Athena in Greek cities flourished with imperial support. The story of the Jewish people returning to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem under royal blessing speaks softly of this respect. Across the empire, priests, scholars, and oracles continued their ancient roles, sustained by the treasury itself. This tolerance was both practical and profound. By honoring diverse gods, the empire nurtured peace and believed that many names might reflect a single universal truth. The great king could be the chosen of Ahura Mazda for some, the earthly representative of Marduk for others, and the rightful pharaoh for yet another. Learning and knowledge blossomed throughout the empire's many lands. Ancient centers like Babylon and Egypt carried forward their timeless traditions, training scribes, charting stars, studying medicine, and advancing mathematics. In the imperial heartland, young nobles were taught skills for leadership, how to ride, to wield a bow, and to speak honestly. Literacy spread among administrators, who mastered several scripts to communicate across cultures. Ideas traveled as freely as goods. Babylonian astronomy inspiring Greek thinkers, Egyptian healing crossing deserts and mountains, architectural techniques mingling across cities. The empire's vast road network was its nervous system. The royal road from Sardis to Susa stretched like a ribbon through the land, dotted with stations where couriers rested and messages sped onward. Regional roads connected capitals to villages, while ships sailed the seas, carrying goods and stories alike between Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian ports. Officials, merchants, and artisans journeyed with a freedom that brought distant corners of the world close together. Within this lively exchange, material culture reflected a beautiful balance. Standardized coins made trade smooth. Luxury textiles and intricate jewelry bore styles admired far and wide. Yet local crafts kept their own distinct flair, blending foreign influences with homegrown artistry. In all these ways, the empire held together not through force alone, but through a delicate dance of unity and diversity. A grand design that embraced many voices, many customs, all resting beneath the wide, shared sky. The empire's true genius lay in its graceful balance, a flexible system that embraced difference, yet held its vast and varied peoples together as one. Perhaps its greatest gift was the long-lasting peace it fostered across lands that had once known little but conflict and unrest. This Pax Persica, as one might softly call it, quieted the storms of warfare, banditry, and piracy, weaving security into the fabric of everyday life. With peace came the gentle flourishing of fields and markets, of art and ideas, things that grow best without the shadow of war. Life under Achaemenid rule was no perfect paradise, nor was it a harsh prison. Experiences varied widely, shaped by where people lived, their place in society, their work, and the tides of history. Still, compared to empires before and after, this realm showed remarkable tolerance, a delicate harmony of diverse cultures thriving within a practical, well-ordered administration that stretched across 3 continents. From the visionary Cyrus, through his son's careful refinements, and the trials of Xerxes' reign, the empire wove a tapestry where millions balanced the rhythms of their local traditions with the innovations of imperial life. It is this rich, complex mosaic, more than tales of kings or battles, that forms the deepest legacy of the first great multinational empire. Much of what we know comes from outsiders' words, often colored by their own views. Yet the art and architecture left behind speak clearly and directly, revealing how this empire wished to see itself, and how it invited others to see it. A story carved in stone and painted in vivid relief. To grasp the beauty and meaning of Achaemenid art, one must first appreciate its revolutionary nature. This was no empire born from a long-standing artistic tradition of its own. rising suddenly onto the world stage from a modest homeland. It encountered the rich legacies of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Libya, and more. Instead of copying one tradition, it blended many weaving elements from these ancient cultures into something new and uniquely imperial. From Mesopotamia came the grandeur of monumental scale and powerful symbols. Egypt contributed masterful precision in stone carving and elegant artistic rules. The kingdoms of Anatolia offered distinctive architectural shapes and decorative patterns. Greek artisans influenced sculptural techniques, while the nomads of Central Asia inspired delicate metalwork. Together, these diverse threads, combined with native Iranian forms, created a visual language, unmistakably imperial, one that whispered unity in diversity. No place shows this harmony more clearly than Persepolis, the empire's ceremonial heart, raised by the son of Cyrus and his successors. Visitors approaching this grand complex would first ascend a gentle, wide staircase, designed not to intimidate, but to welcome, allowing a stately and measured procession upward. At the summit stood the Gate of All Nations, guarded by enormous lamassu, majestic, human-headed winged bulls, borrowed from Assyrian art but reshaped with the empire's own elegant touch. Passing through this gate, one entered the vast upper audience hall. Its ceiling held aloft by towering columns crowned with unique capitals. Pairs of animals back to back, a distinctly Achaemenid innovation. Unlike the heavy, closely spaced columns of Egyptian temples or the squat columns of Greece, these soared slender and tall, filling the space with light and openness, an architectural marvel that required skillful engineering and precise stonework. Along the staircases of this great hall, magnificent reliefs tell a story of imperial harmony. In careful formal procession, 23 nations bring gifts to the great king. Each group wears its own traditional dress, carries goods from their homeland, and moves with calm dignity. These sculptures show a vision of empire, not through force or conquest, but through peaceful allegiance and respect. Unlike the harsh Assyrian images of conquered captives bound and broken, here the tribute bearers walk proudly, preserving their cultures even as they join in the greater imperial story. The very arrangement of the figures speaks volumes. Delegations from different regions alternate, rather than grouping by geography, reinforcing the idea that many diverse peoples stood united beneath one sovereign rule. The artistry carved into these reliefs is truly a marvel of delicate precision and attentive craftsmanship. Every thread of the textiles is carefully woven into stone, capturing intricate patterns unique to each region. Faces emerge with gentle subtlety, portraying distinct ethnic features not as caricatures but as respectful reflections of the diverse peoples of the empire. Everyday objects, vessels, weapons, animals, are rendered with such fidelity that modern scholars can trace their materials and origins across the vast realm. This exquisite detail served as a kind of visual record, a way to show viewers, many of whom would never leave their own province, the rich variety of the empire. The sculptural narrative stretches through Persepolis, extending into the Great Hall, known as the Hall of 100 Columns. Here, reliefs depict the king, enthroned beneath the soaring winged symbol of Ahura Mazda, surrounded by courtiers. Elsewhere, imperial guards stand at attention in perfectly ordered ranks, their arms and attire rendered with painstaking accuracy. Even the treasury walls are adorned with scenes of tribute, echoing those on the upper hall, reinforcing the central theme of many peoples willingly offering support to their shared imperial center. What makes these sculptures especially fascinating is how they were made, a living example of the empire's multicultural spirit. Archaeological finds tell us that artists and craftsmen from across the empire worked side by side on these monumental creations. Egyptian stone carvers lent their mastery of hard stone. Ionian Greek sculptors may have shaped some of the figures' forms. Babylonian and Elamite artisans contributed their unique traditions. The result wasn't a mere patchwork of styles, but a true synthesis. A new artistic language born from many sources but harmonized into a single imperial vision. This spirit of collaboration spread beyond Persepolis to other imperial centers like Susa. Their inscriptions proudly acknowledge the many peoples who built the palaces: goldsmiths from Media and Egypt, woodworkers from Saurians and Egyptians, bricklayers from Babylon, and decorators from both Media and Egypt. Such multicultural cooperation wasn't just practical, it was a statement of imperial identity. Beyond these capitals, grand architectural projects echoed imperial presence throughout the provinces. In Pasargudi, Cyrus's royal park, known from Old Persian as paradise, brought together formal gardens, flowing waterways, and elegant pavilions, celebrating both the monarch's power and harmony with nature. This concept of a paradise garden would inspire landscape designs, stretching from the Mediterranean far into India for centuries to come. Across the empire's provincial capitals, Sardis in Lydia, Cyzicus on the Hellespont, Xanthos in Lycia, archaeological remains reveal buildings, blending imperial forms with local traditions. These structures physically embodied the empire's flexible governance, upholding central authority while honoring regional customs. The empire's portable arts echo this same grand synthesis. Luxury vessels, precious metals, and elaborate adornments speak of cosmic order and unity. The famed treasure of the Oxus stands as a breathtaking example, its objects marrying technical brilliance with rich symbolism drawn from many traditions. Animal motifs appear frequently, crafted with lifelike anatomical detail, yet arranged in stylized, harmonious designs. One iconic vessel type, the Rhyton, features a carefully cut opening atop an animal protomb, blending artistry and function. Such vessels, made with sophisticated metalworking skills, became prestigious symbols throughout the empire, serving in elite drinking ceremonies that combined practical use with deep cultural meaning. Though textiles have rarely survived the passage of time, contemporary accounts describe magnificent carpets adorned with figures, exquisitely embroidered garments, and richly patterned fabrics commanding great value. The famous Alexander mosaic, created later but likely depicting royal garments, shows intricate patterns and figures woven or embroidered into luxurious cloth, a testament to the empire's textile artistry. Jewelry and personal adornments flourished under imperial patronage, reaching remarkable refinement. Gold necklaces shimmered with delicate granulation, bracelets ended in finely crafted animal heads, earrings glowed with cloisonne inlays. These treasures reveal technical mastery alongside a distinctly imperial aesthetic. Craft traditions blended techniques from all corners of the realm: Egyptian stone cutting, Lydian granulation, and Central Asian animal motifs mingling in a vibrant artistic dialogue. Seals carved from precious stones played a crucial role in imperial administration while expressing a unique artistic language. Official seals combined practical imagery with symbolic power. The royal hero motif, showing a crowned figure overpowering beasts or monsters, appeared on seals throughout the empire, visually reaffirming royal authority wherever documents traveled. Coinage, introduced by the son of Cyrus, added another layer to this artistic and practical tradition. Gold derricks and silver siglos bore consistent imperial imagery, the great king depicted as a poised archer or spearman, instantly recognizable across distant provinces. These coins maintained exceptional standards of weight, purity, and design over centuries, binding the vast realm together through commerce and symbol. Throughout the vast reaches of the empire, commerce flowed steadily, supported by the careful craftsmanship of fine tableware and precious metals that did more than serve a practical purpose. They carried the image of the sovereign far and wide, from the sparkling shores of the Aegean, all the way to the lush valleys near the Indus River. A distinct aesthetic emerged, one that linked distant lands in a shared experience of imperial grandeur. Among the many treasured objects, the Achaemenid loped bull became especially beloved. Its graceful profile, often adorned with delicate rosette motifs at its heart, appeared in numerous forms and materials. For the empire's highest elites, it gleamed in precious metals, while provincial administrators might use finely crafted stone versions. Even those with humbler means enjoyed ceramic imitations, each reflecting a common style that tied the empire's people together. Remarkably, this attention to beauty extended even to the most utilitarian of objects. At Persepolis, for example, a fragmentary brickwater pipe bears an inscription in 3 languages, proudly marking it as the work of the great king himself. This intimate link between the sovereign and the everyday infrastructure of the realm reveals a worldview where order, harmony, and refinement reached from the cosmic heights down to the smallest details of daily life. The influence of Achaemenid art did not remain confined within political borders. In the western regions of Anatolia, East Greek artisans embraced imperial motifs and techniques, blending them into a hybrid style often called Greco-Persian. To the north, Scythian gold treasures from the steppes beyond the Black Sea reflect unmistakable imperial inspiration in their craftsmanship and imagery. Even in Athens, despite political rivalry, subtle Eastern architectural and decorative elements betray the reach of imperial aesthetic influence. Central to Achaemenid artistic values were orderliness, balance, and the harmonious blending of diverse elements. These qualities mirrored the empire's grand ideology, a vision of the world, not as a patchwork of conquered lands, but as a cosmos arranged under just and rightful sovereignty. Art was more than representation. It was an active expression of this order. Consider Persepolis, where the careful spatial organization, the axial symmetry, the hierarchical layout, guided visitors through a journey of imperial harmony. The reliefs of tribute bearers, ascending the grand staircase, celebrate peaceful diversity, united beneath a singular authority. Repeated patterns on imperial textiles and metalwork echoed this sense of cosmic order, reinforcing a message that stretched from monumental architecture to personal adornments. Many peoples, one empire, harmonized under righteous rule. Color, too, played an essential role. Though much of the vibrant paint has faded with time, archaeological evidence reveals that the seemingly austere stone reliefs of Persepolis were originally awash in rich hues. Blue glazed bricks gleamed alongside golden fittings, while colorful textiles hung to brighten grand halls. This once vivid palette created sensory environments that impressed visitors with their majesty, while also conveying layered imperial symbolism. Beyond visual arts, ephemeral yet vital components like music and performance enlivened imperial ceremonies. Contemporary accounts tell of elaborate court music employing instruments gathered from across the empire's vast territories. The reliefs at Persepolis depict musicians accompanying grand processions, suggesting that performing arts like visual art wove together diverse traditions into a uniquely imperial cultural tapestry. The artistic legacy of the Achaemenids did not end with the fall of their empire. Alexander the Great and his successors embraced many of these visual traditions, especially in royal portraiture and court ritual. Later dynasties, the Parthians and Sassanids, ruling much of the same lands, consciously revived and reinterpreted imperial motifs. Even Islamic artistic traditions that later blossomed in these regions preserved echoes of Achaemenid art, particularly in architecture and garden design. Most strikingly, the artistic vision fostered under Achaemenid patronage set enduring standards that shaped courtly arts across Eurasia for centuries. The idea of depicting diverse peoples unified by a single sovereign re-emerged in Byzantine, Islamic and even Chinese imperial art. The Paradise Garden concept inspired landscapes from Moorish Spain to Mughal India. The monumental splendor first achieved at Persepolis became a model for royal architecture across many civilizations. For the first time, an empire created a consistent artistic language spanning 3 continents, making its authority instantly recognizable whether one stood in Egypt's deserts, Anatolia's hills, or the Hindu Kush mountains. This visual coherence helped hold together a realm rich in cultural and linguistic diversity. Behind these artistic achievements lay impressive technological advances. The enormous stone blocks at Persepolis, some weighing over 100 tons, were quarried, transported, and set with astonishing precision, cut to fit with accuracy measured in fractions of an inch. This feat of engineering built on Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions, but pushed their mastery to new heights. Metalworking also reached extraordinary refinement, especially in gold and silver. Imperial workshops perfected techniques like repousse, chasing, and invisible joining of separate parts, allowing craftsmen to create forms of stunning delicacy. The famous gold and silver rhytons, drinking vessels topped with animal heads, showcase virtuoso skill alongside artistic elegance. Water management was another realm where practicality met beauty. In the empire's arid heartland, sophisticated systems sustained urban centers and lush royal gardens, The qanats, underground water channels, though not invented by the Achaemenids, were perfected under their rule. These ingenious tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles beneath the earth, tapped mountain aquifers and delivered water to settlements with minimal evaporation, ensuring life flourished in even the harshest climates. These ingenious water systems nourished elaborate garden complexes that seamlessly combined practical agriculture with refined aesthetic pleasure. The famed Paradise Garden brought together fruit trees, colorful flower beds, shaded walkways, and gently flowing water features, crafting a designed landscape that boldly proclaimed humanity's mastery over nature itself. Archaeological discoveries at Pasargadae reveal stone channels carved with precisely calculated gradients, engineered not only to move water but to create specific visual and auditory effects. Engineering serving beauty as much as utility. The influence of these imperial gardens stretched far beyond their original locations. The concept of the four-part garden, divided by intersecting water channels known as the Chahorabagh, radiated outward from Iran into India, Central Asia, and eventually to Moorish Spain, though each culture adapted the basic design to suit local climates and aesthetic preferences. The fundamental concept established under Achaemenid rule remained unmistakably recognizable across vast expanses and centuries. Imperial patronage also spurred remarkable innovations in urban planning, while adapting to established cities like Babylon and Sardis, which required careful negotiation with existing layouts. New urban foundations could implement imperial concepts from the ground up. Archaeological evidence from several such centers reveals rationally planned grids, sophisticated drainage systems, and hierarchically arranged public buildings, all physical embodiments of the empire's values of order, rationality, and centralized control. The vast road networks linking these urban hubs reflected a similar blend of engineering practicality and ideological symbolism. The Royal Road, stretching from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, featured meticulously maintained surfaces, sturdy bridges spanning major rivers, and regular posting stations that facilitated swift communication and commerce. From this main artery, secondary roads branched outward, weaving a transportation web that unified the sprawling realm in both function and symbolic representation of the sovereign's dominion over space and distance. Maritime infrastructure further connected coastal provinces, with harbor works unearthed at Sidon and port facilities throughout the Persian Gulf, attesting to significant investment in naval capabilities. Imperial fleets, referenced in textual sources, complemented overland routes to create an integrated transport network, unprecedented in scale and efficiency. Military architecture similarly adapted to the empire's diverse defensive needs. Border fortresses guarded crucial mountain passes and river crossings, while garrison towns stationed troops in strategic locations. Provincial capitals incorporated defensive walls and fortifications, blending local building traditions with imperial military specifications. The empire's practical flexibility shone through in its use of regionally appropriate materials, mud brick in Mesopotamia, stone in mountainous zones, demonstrating an approach both adaptive and functional. This adaptability extended into religious architecture as well. The empire actively supported temple construction and upkeep across varied religious traditions. Egyptian pharaohs' temple complexes received additions from several Achaemenid rulers, honoring long-standing local architectural styles. In Anatolia and the Levant, regional shrine customs continued under imperial patronage. The rebuilding of the Jerusalem Temple, authorized and funded by the empire, exemplifies this policy. Such religious buildings maintained local identities, while acknowledging imperial authority through inscriptions or subtle design details. Similar patterns of continuity and innovation emerged in domestic architecture. Elite residences across the empire incorporated imperial stylistic elements, columned porticos, distinctive decorative motifs, particular spatial arrangements, while preserving regional construction traditions. This material culture allowed local elites to express both their native heritage and their connection to the broader imperial network. Even ordinary households reflected imperial influence through everyday objects. Excavations have uncovered ceramics bearing imperial-style decorations, textiles patterned with recognizable motifs, and small personal items infused with imperial aesthetic sensibilities in modest homes throughout the realm. These material goods subtly linked common people to the empire's visual culture, normalizing imperial presence through the fabric of daily life. The scale and complexity of imperial construction projects demanded highly sophisticated management. Administrative texts from Persepolis provide detailed records of how workers were organized, supplied, and compensated during major building efforts. Craftspeople from across the empire were assembled, provided with raw materials sourced from distant lands, and integrated into coordinated teams operating under centralized oversight. This logistical feat, directing multicultural workforces on massive projects, rivals the architectural achievements themselves. Raw materials for imperial projects often traveled astonishing distances. The palace at Susa, according to its foundation inscription, incorporated cedar from Lebanon, gold from Sardis and Bactria, lapis lazuli and carnelian from Sogdiana, turquoise from Turkmenistan, silver and ebony from Egypt, ivory from Ethiopia and India, and decorative stones from Ionia. This global procurement physically embodied the empire's vast geographical scope, while showcasing its impressive logistical capabilities. The skilled artisans who fashioned imperial monuments and luxury goods hailed from equally diverse origins. Administrative records list Egyptian stonemasons, Lydian goldsmiths, Babylonian brickmakers, and Greek sculptors working side by side on grand projects. Their collaborative efforts forged the distinctive imperial style, an artistic synthesis blending techniques and aesthetics from multiple traditions into a new, coherent visual language. These craftsmen were not slaves but highly trained professionals, often organized into hereditary craft guilds with their own internal hierarchies. The Persepolis archives meticulously document their wages, rations, and working conditions. Master artisans of exceptional skill sometimes received special honors and rewards directly from the sovereign, underscoring the high value placed on their expertise. Managing such a diverse workforce demanded exceptional administrative acumen and cultural sensitivity. Designs and instructions had to be conveyed across language barriers. Technical vocabularies from differing craft traditions required harmonization, and work customs rooted in distinct cultural backgrounds needed accommodation. The successful realization of stylistically unified monuments and objects across these divides stands as a remarkable testament to imperial cross-cultural management. The imperial artistic program served both practical political aims and achieved aesthetic brilliance by creating a visual language instantly recognizable as Achaemenid. It legitimized imperial authority across diverse territories by incorporating elements from many traditions. By visually articulating imperial ideology, it acknowledged and respected the cultural heritage of subject peoples, making political messages accessible beyond the reach of inscriptions or proclamations. Above all, Achaemenid art and architecture physically embodied the empire's core proposition that diverse peoples could maintain their distinct identities while participating in a larger, unified whole under just and righteous sovereignty. The ordered procession of tribute bearers on the upper Dryavash Hall, the harmonious blending of architectural motifs from various cultures, and the balanced composition of imperial art on every scale reinforced this central ideology through compelling visual form. When Alexander of Macedon's forces entered Persepolis in 330 BCE, they encountered an environment of unprecedented splendor, technical mastery, and ideological unity. Despite cultural prejudices against Eastern luxury, Greek sources acknowledged the awe-inspiring authority these monuments projected. The subsequent burning of the palace complex, whether deliberately ordered by Alexander or accidentally set ablaze during a revelry, destroyed much of this magnificence. Yet the archaeological remains continue to convey a faint echo of the original grandeur. In the centuries following, the empire's artistic and architectural legacy persisted, influencing successor states and cultures across Eurasia. The Seleucids, Alexander's heirs in much of the former empire, adopted numerous Achaemenid architectural forms and administrative practices. The Parthians and Sassanids consciously revived specific imperial motifs as part of their claims to legitimate succession. Even the Islamic architectural traditions that later flourished in these regions preserved elements of Achaemenid design, particularly in palatial structures, garden layouts, and decorative patterns. Most enduringly, the empire established a model for how monumental art and architecture could express political ideology, integrate diverse cultural components, and craft physical environments, shaping the experience of sovereignty. This model influenced imperial projects from Rome to China, Byzantium to the Mughal courts, laying the foundation for the first truly international royal style. The artistic and architectural principles cultivated by the Achaemenids would continue to inform courtly arts across Eurasia for millennia. Yet, the assassination of Xerxes in 465 BCE marked a critical turning point. Though the empire endured for over a century afterward, maintaining vast territories and a complex bureaucracy, subtle signs of structural weakening began to surface. Artaxerxes I, who ascended the throne after eliminating the conspirators who had slain his father, inherited an empire still brimming with material wealth. The treasury remained full, provincial unrest was minimal, and the administrative apparatus established by Darius the Great functioned efficiently. Still, both external and internal challenges soon tested the new ruler's mettle. Egypt, historically one of the empire's most turbulent provinces, erupted in rebellion under a local leader named Inauros. Encouraged by support from Athens, then building its own maritime empire, and emboldened by previous victories against Xerxes, the Egyptians sought to shake off imperial control. Though the revolt was eventually crushed, it exposed deep provincial dissatisfaction and highlighted the growing ambitions of Athens to destabilize Achaemenid authority in this wealthy and strategically vital region. Artaxerxes responded to these emerging challenges with a notably shrewd and flexible diplomatic approach. Instead of engaging in another costly and uncertain direct military campaign against mainland Greece, he chose to wield gold as a strategic tool. Financial support was channeled to Sparta and various Greek city-states that opposed Athenian dominance, effectively exploiting the deep divisions within the fragmented Greek world. This policy of playing rival city-states against each other proved far more economical and sustainable than open warfare and was continued by later rulers. Around 449 BCE, the Peace of Callias, or a similar accord whose precise details remain debated by historians, formalized the relations between Athens and the empire. This pragmatic treaty appears to have delineated mutual spheres of influence. Athens tacitly acknowledged Persian sovereignty over Anatolia, while the great king conceded Athenian dominance throughout the Aegean Sea. This arrangement demonstrated the empire's diplomatic pragmatism, focusing on essential interests rather than pursuing vengeance or expansionist ambitions. At home, Artaxerxes faced the perennial task of maintaining firm control over powerful satraps, who governed far-flung provinces. These satraps, often chosen from the upper echelons of nobility and commanding considerable military and economic resources, continually tested the limits of their autonomy. To counteract this, the monarch strategically appointed royal princes to govern key satrapies, thus installing trusted members of the royal family as his personal agents. Additionally, imperial officials were frequently rotated to prevent them from entrenching local power bases or developing independent agendas. Court life during this era became increasingly intricate and ritualized. Access to the sovereign was tightly controlled by elaborate protocols specifying who might approach the throne and under what circumstances. Meanwhile, the royal harem expanded not only in size but in political clout. Queens, queen mothers, and influential concubines played significant roles in the delicate processes of succession and court politics. Eunuch chamberlains, who controlled access to the king's person, amassed considerable behind-the-scenes influence, wielding power often disproportionate to their official titles. This growing isolation of the monarch from direct interaction with ordinary subjects was driven by both practical concerns, security foremost among them, and evolving ideas of royal majesty and sanctity. Yet this distancing also complicated governance. The king's understanding of provincial realities became increasingly mediated and filtered through layers of officials and family members, sometimes obscuring the true state of affairs in the far reaches of the empire. When Artaxerxes I died in 424 BCE, After a reign of 41 years, a brief but turbulent succession crisis erupted. Xerxes II claimed the throne but held power for a mere 45 days, before being assassinated by his half-brother Sogdianus. Sogdianus himself ruled only 6 months before being overthrown by another half-brother, who ascended as Darius II. This rapid sequence of assassinations and power struggles exposed weakening mechanisms for orderly imperial succession. Once established, however, Darius II ruled for nearly 2 decades, overseeing continued Persian involvement in Greek affairs during the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Imperial policy decisively favored Sparta, channeling financial support that ultimately helped fund the Spartan fleet's victory over Athens in 405 BCE. This outcome served Persian interests by eliminating Athens as a naval power that had previously backed revolts in Egypt and other restive provinces. During this period, the power of the satraps grew increasingly pronounced, especially in western Anatolia. Figures such as the satrap Pharnabazus and his rival Tissaphernes often pursued semi-independent policies. At times they cooperated with the central government, at others they acted according to their own ambitions. The monarch's capacity to enforce authority over these potent regional governors appeared to be waning, though the fundamental administrative structures of imperial governance remained intact. Court intrigue also intensified. Queen Parysatis wielded extraordinary influence at court, particularly in matters of succession. Her favored son, Cyrus the Younger, was granted exceptional authority as commander in western Anatolia. Despite being younger than the crown prince, Artaxerxes II, this appointment would prove fateful. Upon Darius II's death in 404 BCE, Artaxerxes II took the throne. Almost immediately, Cyrus the Younger rebelled. Leveraging his ties with Spartan military leaders and his own considerable resources as satrap, he assembled an army including some 10,000 Greek mercenaries, the famed 10,000 immortalized by Xenophon's. Cyrus marched into the imperial heartland, confronting his brother's larger forces near Babylon in 401 BCE. Though the rebel army initially made gains, Cyrus was killed in battle. With their leader dead, the rebellion collapsed, leaving the Greek mercenaries stranded deep in hostile territory. Their arduous fighting retreat northward, through hostile lands and difficult terrain, ultimately brought them to the safety of the Black Sea coast. A dramatic episode that revealed both the growing factionalism at the empire's highest levels and an increasing reliance on Greek mercenaries in Persian military affairs, trends that would accelerate in the decades ahead. Having survived this serious challenge, Artaxerxes II faced ongoing instability on multiple fronts. Egypt regained independence under native pharaohs around 390 BC, beginning a period of roughly 60 years outside imperial control. In Anatolia, the satraps' revolt saw multiple provincial governors coordinate rebellions against central authority. Although this uprising eventually collapsed due to internal disputes rather than an effective imperial military response, it signaled weakening control in the empire's western territories. Cyprus repeatedly changed hands, with local kings alternately recognizing imperial overlordship or asserting independence with Greek backing. Similarly, coastal cities in the Levant experienced fluctuating loyalties, sometimes submitting to imperial rule, sometimes rebelling or shifting allegiances. While these provincial disturbances did not amount to a comprehensive collapse of the empire, they clearly indicated diminishing central authority over its peripheral lands, and the gradual erosion of the foundations that had once supported the Achaemenid world-spanning dominion. Court politics during this era became increasingly fraught and unpredictable. Artaxerxes II fathered over 100 sons through his numerous concubines, creating a large pool of potential heirs that inevitably sparked fierce factional rivalries and conflicts. As the aging king approached the end of his reign, he formally designated his eldest son Darius as the heir apparent. Yet this decision soon unraveled when Darius was implicated in a conspiracy against his father, and consequently executed, alongside another son caught up in palace intrigues. Amidst this turmoil, Artaxerxes II's younger son Hs skillfully maneuvered through the treacherous political landscape, eliminating rivals and positioning himself as the clear successor. When Artaxerxes II died in 358 BCE, after an impressive 46-year reign, one of the longest in the empire's history, Achis ascended the throne as Artaxerxes III. From the very beginning of his rule, he demonstrated both ruthless decisiveness and administrative competence. He consolidated his power through a bloody purge, executing numerous members of the royal family who could challenge his claim. With his authority secured, he turned his attention to reasserting imperial control over rebellious provinces. Egypt became the foremost challenge, after failed military campaigns in 351 and 348 BCE. Artaxerxes III personally led a massive and well-organized campaign in 343 BCE, which successfully reconquered the wealthy Nile province. This victory ended 6 decades of Egyptian independence, underscoring that, when effectively commanded, imperial military might remained a formidable force. The campaign also replenished the imperial treasury with vast spoils, providing temporary financial stability to the empire. Despite this triumph, the underlying foundations of imperial power were visibly weakening. Greek mercenaries now formed the backbone of the Persian military, with native troops increasingly relegated to secondary roles. While these hired soldiers were often effective in battle, they lacked intrinsic loyalty to the empire, and could sometimes shift allegiances if offered better compensation. This dependency strained the treasury heavily, and introduced a strategic vulnerability into the military apparatus. Meanwhile, provincial governors operated with growing independence, often acting as de facto kings within their territories. The central government struggled to enforce accountability, with traditional oversight mechanisms such as the eyes and ears of the king proving less effective than before. Tax revenues frequently fell short of expectations, suggesting widespread corruption or administrative inefficiency. At court, political intrigue remained intense and deadly. In 338 BCE, Artaxerxes III himself fell victim to a palace conspiracy orchestrated by the powerful eunuch Bagoas. Bagoas placed the king's youngest son, Arceus, on the throne as a puppet ruler. When Arceus attempted to assert genuine independence 2 years later, he was poisoned by the same eunuch, who then installed a distant royal cousin, Darius III, as monarch. This new king, the last of the Achaemenid dynasty, had already proven his military prowess and swiftly eliminated rivals to consolidate his rule. However, scarcely had Darius III secured his throne when an extraordinary threat arose from the west. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander of Macedon crossed the Hellespont with an army of around 40,000 troops, igniting a campaign that would ultimately end the empire's existence. The swift collapse of Persian resistance during Alexander's advance has often been cited as evidence of the empire's terminal decline. But a closer look reveals a more complex reality. At the Battle of the Granicus River, soon after Alexander's landing in Anatolia, Persian forces fought tenaciously and nearly succeeded in killing the Macedonian king. During the subsequent Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, Darius III commanded a sizable army that initially held firm against Alexander's troops, before finally breaking under the Macedonians' superior tactics. The climactic Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE saw Darius field a massive force drawn from across the empire, demonstrating that Persian military mobilization mechanisms still functioned on a grand scale. Though defeated once more by Alexander's tactical genius, the Persian army remained a considerable force. Following his defeat at Gaugamela, Darius fled east, intending to raise yet another army in the provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana. But he was betrayed and assassinated by his own satrap Bessus, who attempted to continue resistance under his authority. Alexander, now claiming the Persian imperial title for himself, pursued and captured Bessus, executing him in a symbolic act of vengeance against the final legitimate Achaemenid ruler. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire was thus less the result of total internal collapse, and more the consequence of an extraordinary external challenge, arriving at a moment of pronounced internal weakness. Had Alexander not emerged, the empire might well have endured for several more generations. Throughout history, many empires have weathered longer stretches of weak leadership, fiscal strain, and provincial autonomy. The empire's misfortune was to face its greatest external threat, just as its internal resilience was at its lowest ebb. Reflecting on the century between Xerxes' assassination and Alexander's conquest, certain patterns of decline are clear. Monarchs became increasingly isolated behind elaborate court ceremonies, reducing their direct awareness of conditions throughout the vast realm. The growing influence of the royal harem, eunuch chamberlains, and palace officials created competing power centers that complicated centralized governance. Succession struggles became more frequent and violent, disrupting administrative continuity. Financial challenges mounted as early imperial wealth dissipated amid administrative corruption, heavy military expenditures, especially payments to mercenaries, and the costly lifestyles of the court and nobility. Revolts in rich provinces like Egypt intermittently reduced the flow of tax revenue. The imperial policy of appointing royal princes and close relatives to govern key satrapies, intended to secure loyalty, often backfired by fostering extravagant provincial courts that drained rather than generated resources. Militarily, increasing dependence on Greek mercenaries was both a symptom and a cause of decline. While indispensable in battle, their high costs strained finances and their conditional loyalty posed strategic risks. Native cavalry drawn from the noble class of the imperial heartland remained formidable, but the quality of infantry forces apparently declined. The complex coordination of multi-ethnic armies, once a great strength of the empire, became increasingly challenging amid rising provincial autonomy. Yet, despite these signs of weakening, remarkable continuities endured. The basic provincial administrative structure, originally established under Darius I, remained largely intact. The imperial road and postal networks continued to function, supporting communication and governance across the vast territories. The empire's multilingual bureaucracy, complex legal frameworks, and extensive commercial networks continued to function, albeit with diminished effectiveness. Even as political control weakened, the cultural and economic integration of the sprawling imperial territories endured. Alexander's ability to make use of the existing imperial machinery following his conquest attests to its ongoing viability. He retained much of the administrative system, employed numerous former Persian officials, and utilized the established roads and treasury systems. Had he encountered a completely collapsed state, such continuity would have been impossible. Instead, he inherited a sophisticated imperial infrastructure, one experiencing institutional fatigue, rather than outright failure. In many respects, the prolonged phase of imperial decline highlighted the resilience of the foundational systems crafted in the empire's early days. The fact that such a vast empire spanning diverse cultures and geographies could sustain its core structures for over 2 centuries, despite episodes of weak leadership and external pressures, stands as a testament to the exceptional accomplishment of its founders. In the spring of 334 BCE, a young monarch from the northern fringes of the Greek world crossed the Hellespont into Anatolia. At just 22 years old, Alexander of Macedon led an army of approximately 40,000 soldiers. While formidable, this force was only a fraction of the military resources theoretically available to his opponent, Darius III. Few foresaw that within a mere 4 years, this youthful Macedonian commander would dismantle the largest empire the world had yet witnessed. Several factors converged to make this moment exceptionally precarious for the Persian imperial structure. Darius III had only recently ascended the throne through the machinations of the eunuch Bagoas, bypassing normal succession practices. Although he swiftly removed rivals to secure his authority, he had little time to solidify personal loyalty networks vital for effective governance. The imperial treasury, while temporarily replenished following the reconquest of Egypt, remained strained by decades of rebellions, military campaigns, and administrative corruption. The bureaucratic system operated, but with reduced efficiency and weakened oversight. Provincial governors often acted with considerable independence, complicating coordinated responses to external threats. Most crucially, the young king invading imperial territory was no ordinary adversary. Alexander had inherited from his father, Philip II, a reformed Macedonian army blending disciplined infantry, shock cavalry, and advanced siege technologies into a highly flexible and coordinated fighting force, unlike anything previously seen in the Mediterranean. Trained from childhood in warfare and inspired by heroic epics, Alexander combined tactical brilliance with boundless ambition. He also benefited from substantial intelligence on Persian lands, obtained through reconnaissance and Greek observers who had served or traveled in the empire. The Greek mercenaries who had traversed the imperial core after the Battle of Cunaxa. The famed 10,000 had exposed the empire's vast scale, but also its potential weak points. Their narrative, recorded by Xenophon, offered invaluable strategic insight for any would-be invader. The first major clash between Alexander and Persian forces took place at the Granicus River in northwest Anatolia. Shortly after crossing, local satraps assembled roughly 20,000 troops, including many Greek mercenaries, to confront the invaders. The battle nearly ended Alexander's campaign before it began. During the initial cavalry engagement, the Macedonian king suffered a potentially fatal blow to his helmet, but was saved by the quick action of a commander. Surviving this narrow escape, Alexander's forces ultimately prevailed due to superior tactical coordination. The Persian army, composed of contingents under multiple commanders lacking unified command, was unable to match the integrated operations of Alexander's combined arms approach. This pattern, smaller, better coordinated Macedonian forces, defeating larger Persian numbers, would recur throughout the campaign. Following this victory, Alexander made a symbolically important decision. Instead of pushing directly inland toward the imperial core, he advanced southward along the Anatolian coast, systematically capturing coastal cities and dismantling Persian naval bases. This campaign effectively neutralized the substantial Persian fleet by depriving it of friendly ports, removing what might have been a decisive defensive advantage. During this coastal campaign, Alexander displayed both military genius and political savvy at cities like Miletus and Halicarnassus. Employing sophisticated siege techniques, he overcame determined resistance. Simultaneously, he positioned himself as a liberator to Greek cities, under Persian control, while strictly enforcing discipline among his troops, to prevent alienating local populations through looting or abuse. The most famous episode of this phase occurred at Gordium, where Alexander encountered the legendary Gordian knot. According to tradition, whoever could unravel this intricate knot would become ruler of Asia. After a brief attempt at a conventional solution, Alexander dramatically cut through the knot with his sword, an act symbolizing his direct, decisive approach to seemingly insurmountable problems, and convincing many observers of his destined victory. By the summer of 333 BCE, Alexander had secured western Anatolia and was moving east into Cilicia. Recognizing the gravity of the threat, Darius III assembled a sizable army to confront him. Ancient sources claim Persian forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands, though modern estimates suggest around 80,000 troops, a significant numerical advantage over Alexander's army. The two armies met at Issus, where the coastal plain narrows between mountains and the sea. This constrained terrain negated much of Persia's numerical superiority, enabling Alexander's disciplined forces to maintain formation against the larger enemy. The Macedonian king personally led his elite companion cavalry in a decisive charge aimed directly at Darius, who occupied the traditional center of the Persian line. As the cavalry breached the imperial command position, Darius chose to flee rather than risk capture or death. A strategic retreat that, however, precipitated the collapse of Persian resistance in the battle. The imperial camp, royal family members, and vast treasure fell into Alexander's hands. Alexander's treatment of the captured royal women, Darius's mother, wife and daughters, demonstrated his political acumen. Rather than subjecting them to the brutal fate typical for female captives in ancient warfare, he accorded them respect and honor befitting their status. This chivalrous conduct served multiple purposes. It portrayed Alexander as a legitimate ruler rather than a mere conqueror, opened potential avenues for negotiation with Darius, and impressed local populations with Macedonian discipline and restraint. Following this victory, Alexander again made a strategic choice that surprised many contemporaries. Instead of immediately pursuing Darius deeper into the imperial heartland, he turned south toward Phoenicia and Egypt. This decision reflected both military calculation and Alexander's evolving vision of empire. By securing the entire eastern Mediterranean coastline, Alexander effectively eliminated any chance for the Persian Empire to rebuild its naval power. Capturing Egypt, the wealthiest province, not only provided substantial resources, but also offered him the potential to legitimize his rule as the rightful successor to the ancient pharaohs. The siege of Tyre in 332 BCE showcased Alexander's resolve and remarkable engineering skills. This Phoenician island city, renowned for its massive fortifications and natural defenses provided by the surrounding sea, had resisted countless previous sieges. To overcome these defenses, Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway connecting the island to the mainland, a monumental engineering feat that took months of labor, despite constant attacks from Tyrian ships and missile fire. Once the causeway reached the island, Alexander coordinated the use of siege towers, battering rams, and naval forces in a combined assault that eventually breached Tyre's formidable walls. Alexander's treatment of the conquered city was harsh and uncompromising. Thousands of fighting men were executed, while women and children were sold into slavery, sending a grim warning about the cost of resistance. This severity stood in stark contrast to the clemency he had shown toward cities that surrendered without fighting. Gaza, the final major Persian stronghold along the Mediterranean coast, fell after another protracted siege, effectively securing the entire eastern Mediterranean under Alexander's control. Entering Egypt, Alexander encountered virtually no opposition. The Egyptians, who had only recently lost their independence after 6 decades, viewed Persian rule as oppressive foreign domination and welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The Egyptian priesthood further legitimized his authority by recognizing him as a pharaoh and son of the god Amen. During his time in Egypt, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria on the western edge of the Nile Delta, taking advantage of its excellent harbor potential. This city would eventually grow into the Mediterranean's foremost commercial and intellectual hub, a lasting monument to Alexander's vision of a world where Greek and Eastern cultures could merge and flourish. Alexander also famously visited the Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis deep in the Libyan desert, though the exact nature of this encounter remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts suggest the oracle proclaimed Alexander as the son of a god. Whatever transpired, the visit clearly held profound personal significance for the conqueror. Increasingly, Alexander appeared to see himself not merely as a military commander, but as a cosmic figure chosen by divine forces to fulfill a transformative mission. By spring of 331 BCE, Alexander had firmly established control over the entire eastern Mediterranean coast, and replenished his treasury with Egypt's vast wealth. His focus then shifted toward the imperial core, where Darius had used the intervening months to muster an even larger army, drawing from the wealth and manpower of upper satrapies such as Media, Persia, Bactria, and Sogdiana. The imperial forces assembled on the northern Mesopotamian plains, but Darius chose the battlefield near Gaugamela with great care, selecting open terrain that would allow his superior numbers, especially his cavalry and chariots, maximum freedom of maneuver. He even had the ground leveled to provide ideal conditions for his feared chariot charges. On the morning of October 1st, 331 BCE, the two armies faced each other across the expansive plain. The Persian force, vastly outnumbering the Macedonians, stretched well beyond Alexander's lines on both flanks, threatening to encircle his army. Parmenion, Alexander's senior general, advised launching a night attack to avoid this dangerous situation, but Alexander insisted on engaging in daylight battle, famously declaring, "I will not steal my victory." As combat began, Darius deployed his scythed chariots against the Macedonian ranks, aiming to disrupt their formations before the main engagement. Alexander's troops, however, were well trained to meet this threat. They simply opened their ranks, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through, then quickly closed ranks again in good order. The failure of the chariot charge was the first of several tactical setbacks for the Persians that day. The main battle unfolded according to Alexander's meticulously devised plan. Observing that Darius had reinforced his left wing to counter the anticipated Macedonian cavalry assault there, Alexander shifted his elite forces slightly to the right as the Macedonian line advanced in a diagonal formation. The Persian troops on the left wing followed this movement, eventually creating a gap in the center of their formation. Seizing this critical opportunity, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation straight toward Darius's position at the center of the Persian line. At the same time, Macedonian infantry engaged the Persian foot soldiers, preventing them from closing the gap that Alexander's charge was creating. Darius, realizing that his diverse imperial forces relied heavily on centralized leadership, unlike the more integrated Macedonian army, saw his cavalry breaking through toward him. Perhaps recalling the outcome of previous battles, he chose to withdraw rather than risk capture. His flight threw the nearby Persian units into confusion, which rapidly spread across the imperial center and right flank. Meanwhile, on the Persian left, their cavalry had managed to break through Macedonian lines and reached the enemy baggage train. However, this localized success came too late to change the overall outcome of the battle. With the collapse of the Persian center, the Battle of Gaugamela concluded with a full-scale retreat of the imperial army. Though the casualties were not as devastating as they might have been, Darius escaped with a sizable escort, intending to rally further forces in the eastern state. After a brief pursuit, Alexander turned toward Babylon, the greatest city of Mesopotamia and one of the empire's key capitals. Babylon's peaceful surrender marked a critical milestone in the campaign. The Babylonian satrap Mazachis chose cooperation over resistance, and Alexander rewarded this loyalty by allowing Mazachis to retain his position under the new regime. This policy of integrating cooperative imperial officials into the administration became characteristic of Alexander's approach, enabling relatively smooth transitions in governance. From Babylon, Alexander proceeded to Susa, another imperial capital, housing immense treasuries, which now fell into his hands. The wealth amassed through centuries of imperial taxation provided the resources to finance Alexander's ongoing campaigns and reward his soldiers. Yet even these riches were overshadowed by what awaited the Macedonian army at Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. Arriving at Persepolis in January 330 BCE, Alexander entered the magnificent complex built by Darius I and his successors. Here stood the tangible embodiment of Persian imperial ideology and artistic achievement. Grand staircases adorned with reliefs depicting tribute bearers from 23 nations, vast audience halls supported by forests of towering columns, and treasuries filled with wealth accumulated over 2 centuries. Alexander's initial conduct at Persepolis showed notable restraint. While permitting his troops to plunder the treasury as a reward, he protected the palaces and administrative buildings from indiscriminate looting, installing trusted officers to oversee the complex. He seemed to recognize Persepolis's symbolic significance as a center of imperial legitimacy, one he might someday claim for himself. However, several months later, following a victory celebration banquet, the palace complex was set ablaze in an act that remains controversial. Ancient sources offer conflicting versions. Some describe the fire as an accidental blaze started during drunken revelry, while others suggest it was a deliberate act of retribution for Xerxes' burning of Athens, a century and a half earlier, possibly encouraged by an Athenian courtesan named Ty. Most likely, the destruction was a symbolic gesture signifying the end of the old imperial order and the dawn of a new era. By burning the ceremonial heart of the empire, while sparing its administrative capitals, Babylon and Susa, Alexander may have been signaling both continuity and transformation, preserving the practical governance apparatus, while ritually ending its previous ideological framework. Regardless of motive, the burning of Persepolis was a turning point. This magnificent complex, the product of 2 centuries of imperial prosperity and artistic endeavor, suffered irreparable damage, though parts would later be partially restored. Persepolis never recovered its former grandeur. Instead, it stood as a solemn testament to the rise and fall of an empire. Its shattered columns and scorched reliefs bore silent witness to the fleeting nature of even the most magnificent political achievements. With the major imperial capitals now firmly in his grasp, Alexander shifted focus to the pursuit of Darius, who had fled eastward toward Ecbatana in Media. The Macedonian forces, reinforced by fresh recruits, and the immense riches seized from the imperial treasuries, advanced swiftly through rugged terrain. Yet Darius moved even faster, managing to stay just ahead of his pursuers. From Ecbatana, the Persian king pressed further east, aiming to reach the provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana, where the satrap Bessus commanded considerable forces. These distant regions, known for their fierce inhabitants and challenging landscapes, offered potential refuge and a base for continued resistance. However, Darius's position became increasingly precarious as his escort diminished through desertions, with many nobles calculating that aligning with the victorious Macedonian would better serve their interests. The final act of this imperial drama unfolded near Hecatompylos in Parthia. There Bessus and other high-ranking officials accompanying Darius arrested the king, possibly intending to use him as leverage against Alexander. But as Alexander's vanguard approached sooner than anticipated, the conspirators fatally wounded Darius and fled eastward. Bessus then proclaimed himself the new ruler. Alexander's troops soon found Darius gravely wounded by the roadside, a victim of betrayal by his own followers. Regardless of his personal sentiments, Alexander recognized the symbolic power in the moment. Draping the fallen sovereign with his own cloak, he ordered a royal burial to be prepared. Later he arranged a grand funeral at Persepolis, honoring Darius with full imperial rights. By doing so, Alexander portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor avenging the last true Achaemenid king. This theme of continuity, rather than outright conquest, became increasingly central to Alexander's strategy. While he had initially presented himself to the Greek city-states as a liberator from Persian domination, he now sought to position himself as the rightful heir to the Achaemenid legacy. He adopted aspects of Persian court ceremony, began wearing imperial regalia, and appointed cooperative former Persian officials to govern key posts. Meanwhile, Bessus and other holdouts fled toward Bactria. Consolidating his hold on the imperial core, Alexander paid homage to the empire's founder by visiting the tomb of Cyrus the Great at Pasargadae, a gesture linking himself to the ancient tradition. His army, now increasingly composed of Macedonians, Greeks, and recruits from former imperial territories, pressed onward in pursuit of Bessus. The campaigns against Bessus and subsequent operations in Bactria, Sogdiana, and eventually into India, lie beyond the scope of the Achaemenid narrative. Suffice it to say, Alexander ultimately captured and executed Bessus, symbolically avenging Darius, and extinguishing the last significant claim to the Persian imperial throne. These eastern provinces were absorbed into Alexander's expanding realm, though at tremendous cost in time, resources, and lives. Alexander's sudden death in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32, following a brief illness, left his vast empire without a clear successor. The enormous domain he had assembled fragmented under competing generals and eventually stabilized into several major Hellenistic kingdoms. The former Achaemenid territories primarily fell under the control of Seleucus and his descendants, who retained many of the Achaemenid administrative systems, while introducing Greek cultural elements and establishing Greek settlements. What explains this sudden imperial collapse? How did an empire that endured for over 2 centuries, surviving past external invasions and internal crises, fall so quickly to a relatively small opponent from its northwestern frontier? The answer lies in a complex mix of systemic weaknesses, unfortunate timing, and the extraordinary skill of the Macedonian leader. The empire Alexander faced was not at its peak. Decades of administrative decline, financial strain, and increasingly autonomous satraps had steadily weakened central authority. Darius III's ascent achieved through palace intrigue rather than traditional succession, and the purging of rivals had fragmented noble support networks. At a moment demanding unity, the empire's military had fallen behind innovations developing outside its borders. While cavalry drawn from the imperial corps remained elite, infantry quality and training lagged behind the advanced tactics of Greek and Macedonian armies. The growing dependence on Greek mercenaries, though providing capable troops, strained finances and introduced loyalty concerns. Most critically, the empire's complex, multi-ethnic armies lacked the unified command and tactical flexibility that defined Alexander's forces. Yet structural flaws alone do not fully explain the collapse. The decisive factor was Alexander himself, a commander of unparalleled talent, commanding a revolutionary military system. His tactical ingenuity, personal leadership, strategic vision, and extraordinary operational speed repeatedly disoriented imperial forces. No prior adversary had combined these qualities so effectively, and the Persian Empire was unprepared for such an unprecedented threat. Timing also played a crucial role. Had Alexander invaded a generation earlier, during the capable reign of Artaxerxes III, or if Darius III had more time to consolidate power, the outcome might have differed. The convergence of imperial weakness and Macedonian strength at this specific historical juncture proved decisive. Importantly, this rapid collapse did not signal a total institutional breakdown. Administrative systems, communication networks, and governance structures continued to operate under new rulers. Alexander and his successors preserved imperial roads, taxation methods, and many other Achaemenid innovations. This continuity amid political upheaval attests to the fundamental solidity of the empire's framework. Even in its final years, therefore, the fall of the Achaemenid Empire represents less a complete civilizational collapse, and more a dramatic political transformation. The governance structures developed over 2 centuries endured under new leadership, while the empire's cultural achievements, technological innovations, and administrative practices influenced future civilizations across Eurasia. As the fires at Persepolis died down in the spring of 330 BCE, they revealed a damaged but still imposing symbol of imperial accomplishment. Like those fire-scarred stones, the empire's legacy would persist long after its political power faded, continuing to shape successor states for centuries. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire to Alexander did not mark the end of Iranian imperial traditions. After nearly 5 centuries under Seleucid, Greek, and then Parthian rule, a new dynasty would emerge, consciously positioning itself as the heir to Achaemenid grandeur. The Sassanids, originating from the province of Persis, the same region that produced Cyrus and his successors, would establish a powerful realm that rivaled Rome for over 4 centuries, and preserved many ancient imperial traditions. To understand this revival, one must briefly examine developments in the centuries following Alexander's death. His empire fractured under competing generals, with the eastern former territories mainly falling under Seleucid control. The Seleucids built a vast but unstable realm, maintaining many Achaemenid administrative practices while incorporating Greek cultural elements. They founded new cities populated by Greek settlers, and developed a Greco-Ionian hybrid court culture. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Seleucid authority weakened in the eastern provinces. From the northeastern region of Parthia arose the Sassanid dynasty, which led a confederation of semi-nomadic peoples, who gradually conquered the Iranian plateau, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia, known externally as the Parthians. They established a loosely centralized empire that endured for nearly 5 centuries. While powerful, the Parthian realm never achieved the administrative centralization or cultural unity of the Achaemenids. Its structure resembled a confederation of semi-autonomous kingdoms and city-states under nominal overlordship. Parthian kings bore the ancient title King of Kings, but power was shared with influential noble families controlling vast territories. Greek cultural influence remained strong in urban centers, while Iranian traditions persisted in rural areas and among the aristocracy. The eastward expansion of Rome brought these 2 powers into prolonged conflict, initiating a rivalry that shaped ancient geopolitics for centuries. Despite occasional Roman advances, such as Emperor Trajan's brief conquest of Mesopotamia, the Parthians generally succeeded in preserving their independence and territorial integrity against the Western superpower. By the early 3rd century CE, the Parthian system was showing unmistakable signs of decline. Ongoing struggles over succession had significantly weakened the central authority, while powerful noble families, especially the influential southern and Karen clans, acted more as independent rulers than loyal vassals to the throne. Repeated incursions by Roman forces had exposed vulnerabilities in Parthian military strength. The conditions were ripe for profound transformation. Amid this instability emerged Artaxerxes, a local ruler from Persis who claimed descent from a priestly lineage known as the Sassanids. By 220 CE, having solidified his control over his home province, Artaxerxes began expanding his domain at the expense of the Parthians. His decisive victory over the last Parthian king, Artabanus V, in 224 CE, marked the official beginning of the Sassanid dynasty. While the full conquest of former Parthian lands took several more years of campaigning, Artaxerxes and his successors framed their ascent not as the birth of a new imperial order, but rather as a revival of ancient glory. They deliberately linked themselves to the Achaemenids, asserting descent from the Chionian kings revered in Zoroastrian tradition. Although modern scholars question the literal accuracy of these genealogical claims, they reflected a genuine cultural continuity and a deliberate program of imperial restoration. This revival was evident across multiple domains. Administratively, the Sassanids established a far more centralized governance system than their Parthian predecessors. Provinces were governed directly by officials appointed by and accountable to the monarch. The ancient title King of Kings was retained, but now backed by stronger central control and a hierarchical bureaucracy. The use of written Middle Persian Pahlavi rather than Aramaic supported this more centralized administration. Zoroastrianism, which under the Parthians had remained influential but not formally dominant, was elevated to the status of state religion by the Sassanids. Artaxerxes, whose father had been a priest, granted unprecedented authority to the Zoroastrian clergy. Religious texts were standardized, and temples were established throughout the empire. While other faiths were generally tolerated, they were placed in a subordinate legal position. This religious organization provided ideological support for royal authority and helped foster cultural unity across the empire's diverse populations. In architecture, the Sassanids deliberately echoed Achaemenid grandeur while incorporating new innovations. At sites such as Firouzabad, Bishapur, and Takibostan, massive palaces featured distinctive architectural elements like the Iwana vaulted hall open at one end that would later influence Islamic architecture. Rock reliefs carved near Naqshi Rustam, the location of Achaemenid royal tombs, explicitly linked Sassanid rulers to their ancient imperial predecessors, while celebrating their own achievements. Militarily, the Sassanids improved upon the Parthian system, maintaining the excellent cavalry traditions of prior Iranian empires, but introducing heavily armored cavalry units, with both horse and rider protected by armor, alongside war elephants. They also developed engineering corps capable of sophisticated siege warfare to complement their field armies. These innovations enabled them to stand their ground against Rome and later the Byzantine Empire for centuries. The early Sassanid period saw remarkable expansion. Shapur, son and successor of Artaxerxes, achieved spectacular victories over Rome, even capturing Emperor Valerian, the only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner and dying in captivity. At its height under Shapur I, the Sassanid Empire stretched from the Euphrates River in the west to the Indus River in the east, and from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south, nearly matching the eastern half of the Achaemenid Empire at its zenith. However, unlike their Achaemenid predecessors, the Sassanids faced a Western rival equal in power and sophistication. Rome and later the Eastern Roman Empire matched the Sassanids in military strength, administrative complexity, and cultural confidence. This balance of power led to a centuries-long stalemate, with contested border regions like Armenia, Upper Mesopotamia, and parts of the Caucasus frequently shifting hands, but neither side gaining a decisive advantage. This protracted Roman-Sassanid rivalry deeply influenced both civilizations. Military technologies and innovations developed by one side were swiftly adopted by the other. Diplomatic protocols evolved to regulate relations between equals, rather than subjugated foes. Even during times of war, trade persisted, facilitating cultural exchanges that flowed both ways. Religious developments added complexity. The rise of Christianity in the Roman world, and the growth of Manichaeism within Sassanid lands, introduced new internal dynamics and competition. Within Sassanid society, distinctive social hierarchies took shape that would influence Iranian history for centuries. At the top was the royal family, whose claim to divine right to rule was based on the concept of royal glory. Below them were four main classes: priests, warriors, scribes, and producers. Although social mobility existed, it typically occurred through service to the state or religious institutions, and within clearly defined limits. Urban life thrived under Sassanid rule. The empire's capitals grew into some of the largest cities of their time, featuring monumental structures such as the massive Arch of Ctesiphon, which held the record for the largest single-span vault for over a millennium. Other key urban centers included Gundashopur, renowned for its Academy of Medicine and Philosophy, Bishopur noted for its architectural fusion of Iranian and Roman styles, and the ancient city of Persepolis, which retained symbolic importance, connecting to Achaemenid traditions. From these centers, trade networks radiated in all directions. Sassanid merchants established commercial colonies as far east as China and Southeast Asia. Luxury goods, particularly silk from China and spices from India, passed through Sassanid territory en route to Mediterranean markets, serving as a vital intermediary. The silk industry exemplified this dynamic. Initially reliant on imports from China, the Sassanids eventually acquired silkworm eggs and mastered silk production themselves. Their textiles, distinguished by medallion patterns often featuring royal or religious motifs, became prized luxury items throughout the Mediterranean and as far north as Europe. Byzantine textile manufacturing would later draw heavily from Sassanid designs, leaving a lasting artistic legacy. Religious diversity marked the Sassanid Empire, despite Zoroastrianism's official status. Jewish communities established since Achaemenid times maintained significant presence, especially in Mesopotamia, where the Babylonian Talmud was compiled during this era. Christian populations grew, particularly in western provinces, sometimes causing friction with Zoroastrian authorities, but often finding ways to coexist within the system. Manichaeans, Buddhists, and various adherents of local faiths further enriched the empire's religious tapestry, adding layers of complexity to its cultural landscape. This religious and cultural diversity sometimes led to tensions, especially when faith communities aligned with political conflicts. For instance, Christians living within the Sassanid domains were occasionally viewed with suspicion due to their shared religion with Byzantium, a frequent adversary of the Sassanid Empire. Despite these suspicions, practical tolerance typically prevailed. Religious minorities accepted a subordinate legal position but in return received protection and communal autonomy within the empire. The Sassanid period was also notable for remarkable intellectual advancements. The academy at Gundashopur emerged as a premier center of medical scholarship, where Greek, Indian, and indigenous Iranian medical knowledge was translated, synthesized, and expanded. Astronomy and mathematics continued the long-standing traditions rooted in Mesopotamian science, with scholars observing celestial phenomena and refining calculations. Philosophical thought flourished as well, combining Greek philosophical works translated into Middle Persian with original compositions, fostering a rich intellectual culture. Sometimes, this intellectual activity crossed imperial boundaries. After the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed Plato's Academy in Athens in 529 CE, several Neoplatonic philosophers sought refuge at the Sassanid court. Their eventual return to Byzantine lands helped reintroduce Persian-influenced philosophical ideas back to the Mediterranean world. Likewise, Indian advances in mathematics and astronomy reached the Middle East through Sassanid intermediaries, enriching the broader intellectual landscape. The Middle Sassanid era was characterized by alternating periods of strength and instability, often reflecting the capabilities of individual rulers. The empire endured constant warfare with Rome and Byzantium, as well as intermittent internal challenges like noble rebellions and succession disputes. Nonetheless, the core institutions and cultural accomplishments remained resilient. The reign of Khosrow I, also known as Anushirvan, from 531 to 579 CE, is frequently regarded as the apex of Sassanid achievement. Under his rule, the empire saw extensive administrative reforms that reinforced centralized authority and restructured the tax system. Diplomatic relations with Byzantium stabilized following a major peace treaty, while cultural and intellectual life flourished, enriched by translations of Indian and Greek works. His successor, Khosrow II, initially sustained this momentum and achieved extraordinary territorial expansion in the early 7th century. At its zenith during his reign, the Sassanid Empire briefly controlled Egypt, the Levant, and much of Anatolia territories that had belonged to the Achaemenid Empire, but had remained under Western control for nearly a millennium. This rapid expansion, however, was short-lived and disastrous. Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a decisive counterattack that not only reclaimed lost lands, but carried the war deep into the Sassanid heartland. By 628 CE. By this time, Khosrow II had been overthrown and executed by his own nobles, and the empire spiraled into chaos with a rapid succession of rulers vying for the throne. This internal disintegration, compounded by decades of exhausting warfare, left the empire dangerously vulnerable on the brink of its greatest challenge. Despite fierce resistance, including notable battles such as Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE and Nahavand in 642 CE, the Sassanid military ultimately could not withstand these dynamic new adversaries. The last Sassanid monarch Yazdegerd III fled eastward but was killed in 651 CE, marking the dynasty's end. The Arab conquests ushered in profound transformations across the former Sassanid lands. Islam gradually supplanted Zoroastrianism as the dominant religion, though the process was gradual and conversion was never complete. Arabic replaced Middle Persian as the language of administration and high culture, though Persian would eventually reassert itself in a transformed form. New political institutions replaced the Sassanid system, incorporating these eastern territories into the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate. Beneath these sweeping changes, remarkable continuities endured. The Caliphate's administrative practices, court ceremonies, and governmental structures drew heavily on Sassanid precedents. Persian-speaking bureaucrats continued to staff the administrative apparatus, preserving the imperial legacy. Literary and artistic traditions maintained many pre-Islamic motifs, even as they evolved in new directions. The idea of Iran as a distinct cultural and historical entity survived the loss of political independence. Most notably, Persian culture experienced a remarkable revival within the Islamic framework. By the 9th and 10th centuries CE, semi-independent Iranian dynasties such as the Sassanids patronized Persian language, literature, and art. The epic tradition of pre-Islamic Iran found splendid expression in Ferdowsi Shahnameh, composed around the year 1000 CE. This monumental work preserved ancient Iranian history and mythology for future generations, linking the Islamic present to a pre-Islamic past, and maintaining a continuous cultural identity, despite religious transformation. This resilience of culture attests to the profound legacies of both the Achaemenid and Sassanid empires. Though separated by centuries and differing in many organizational and ideological aspects, both established governance traditions, cultural expressions, and identity markers that transcended their political forms. The fall of dynasties did not erase the civilizations they nurtured. As we conclude this chapter on the Sassanid era in Iran's imperial saga, a clear pattern emerges. Continuity amid change defines much of this region's history. The deliberate Sassanid revival of Achaemenid traditions, followed by the preservation of Sassanid elements within Islamic civilization, illustrates how imperial legacies can outlive their original political frameworks and influence subsequent historical trajectories over centuries and even millennia. The collapse of the Sassanid Empire in the mid-7th century marked the end of independent Iranian imperial rule, but not the end of its imperial heritage. Though Arab conquerors introduced new religion, language, and political structures to territories once governed from Persepolis and Ctesiphon, the accomplishments of these ancient empires continued to shape civilization far beyond their original time and place. This enduring influence manifested across multiple spheres. In governance, the administrative system pioneered by the Achaemenids provided a model for managing vast territories that later empires adopted and adapted. Alexander the Great maintained much of this system after his conquest, as did his Seleucid successors. The early Islamic Caliphate incorporated many Sassanid governmental practices, often employing Persian-speaking officials, who brought their bureaucratic expertise to the new regime. The physical infrastructure built under imperial rule demonstrated extraordinary durability. Road networks established during the Achaemenid period remained vital arteries for centuries. Some qanats, underground water channels constructed during this era, continue to function today, representing perhaps the longest continuously used human-built infrastructure on Earth. Cities founded or developed under imperial patronage: Alexandria in Egypt, Kandahar in Afghanistan, and Bukhara in Central Asia, maintained their importance through numerous political transitions. Artistic and architectural influences radiated widely from imperial centers. Sassanid textile designs appeared in Byzantine silks and later European fabrics. The four-part garden layout divided by water channels, the Chahora Bagh, spread from Iran to India under the Mughals, then to Central Asia, and eventually to Moorish Spain. Architectural elements like the Sassanid Iwan vaulted hall became fundamental features of Islamic architecture from Spain to India. Religious ideas developed or refined within the imperial realm exerted some of the most profound and far-reaching impacts. Zoroastrian concepts such as cosmic dualism, linear time progressing toward a final judgment, and notions of heaven, hell, and future salvation influenced Judaism during the Babylonian exile and the Achaemenid era. These concepts subsequently entered Christianity and Islam, to faiths whose adherents now number in the billions. Though filtered through centuries of theological evolution, ancient Iranian religious thought continues to shape many people's understanding of their relationship to the divine. The linguistic legacy stretches from antiquity into the present day. Persian vocabulary entered numerous languages, from Turkish and Urdu to Armenian and Swahili. The administrative use of Aramaic under the Achaemenids established it as a lingua franca across the Middle East, enabling its later role as the everyday language of Jesus, and the language from which the scripts for Arabic, Hebrew, and other Middle Eastern writing systems developed. Perhaps most significantly, the imperial approach to cultural diversity set an alternative model to the assimilationist policies common among ancient states. The Achaemenid innovation, further developed by the Sassanids, was the creation of a universal empire that accommodated diversity rather than enforcing uniformity. This approach influenced imperial projects from Rome through the modern era. The recognition that different peoples could maintain distinct identities while participating in a shared political community established a framework that continues to inform modern multicultural governance. The very concept of Irana, cultural, linguistic, and historical entity, distinct from its political manifestations and particular states, owes much to this imperial legacy through shared history, language, and cultural traditions forged during the imperial period. Iranian identity survived repeated conquests, dynastic upheavals, and religious transformations. This continuity enabled the remarkable cultural renaissance within the Islamic context, producing the brilliant achievements of medieval Persian literature, art, and science. The Shahnameh, composed around 1000 CE, epitomizes this cultural resilience. This epic preserved ancient Iranian historical and mythological narratives, bridging the Islamic present to the pre-Islamic past, and maintaining cultural continuity across religious change. Its enduring popularity has kept awareness of imperial achievements alive in popular consciousness. The geographical notion of Iran similarly exhibits remarkable continuity from ancient times to today. Although political borders have shifted over centuries, the core territorial concept of Iran centered on the plateau between the Zagros and Hindu Kush mountains remained consistent from Achaemenid through Sassanid times and into the Islamic era. This enduring geographical idea eventually informed the modern nation-state, which officially adopted the name Iran in 1935, explicitly linking the contemporary polity to its ancient imperial predecessors. In modern geopolitics, awareness of Iran's imperial past shapes both internal self-perceptions and external views of its regional role. Iranian self-conception as heir to ancient civilization achievements influences its diplomatic stance and strategic thinking. Meanwhile, outside powers often interpret Iranian regional influence through the prism of historical imperial boundaries, whether embraced or contested. These perceptions highlight the ongoing relevance of imperial memory in contemporary international relations and institutions. Echoes of imperial concepts persist in unexpected places. The Cyrus cylinder, which records the conqueror's policies after taking Babylon, has been described as an early human rights charter, with a replica displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. While applying modern ideas to an ancient text requires caution, it nonetheless illustrates the lasting significance of Achaemenid approaches to governance and diversity in modern discourse. Ultimately, the greatest legacy of these empires is not found solely in institutions or artifacts, but in demonstrating how political frameworks can transcend their original contexts to influence succeeding civilizations. The administrative systems, artistic traditions, religious ideas, and models of multinational governance pioneered by these ancient rulers continue shaping how societies organize politically, express themselves culturally, and understand spirituality. This pattern of political structures, rising and falling while their cultural contributions evolve and endure, may be the most profound insight from our exploration. The empires of Cyrus, the son of his two spies, and their successors did not merely build transient states, but forged enduring civilizational legacies that continue influencing our world in both visible and subtle ways. In this sense, the first great multinational empire achieved a unique kind of immortality, its influence persisting not through political power, but in humanity's ongoing dialogue about how to create societies that balance unity with diversity, tradition with innovation, and authority with justice.